Hey, I'm Alex, and welcome to Hallucination. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. I found a boy in my pool after a storm. I wish I never brought him inside my house. I found him after a storm. As a kid, I loved searching our pool for creatures the sea had swept in. Grammy's house was built on the very edge of the shore, a giant ancient beach house where I spent every summer. But in Florida, storm season never really ends. I grew used to waking up every morning and running outside barefoot where the sea was still lapping at my ankles. I spent all day sifting through our debris-littered pool with my dollar store fishnet searching for sea creatures. There was one time when I thought I found something. I was kneeling on the edge, peering into the glassy surface speckled with dirt and leaves. Movement under the stillness sent me stumbling back, dropping my net. Upon closer inspection, though, it was just an old plank of wood. I was awkwardly poking at it when the surface exploded, drenching me. For a split second, I felt a rush of excitement. Fish. Until the fish started laughing. Roman, the boy from across the street, the one who could hold his breath far longer than normal humans, was infamous for lurking in Grammy's pool. He claimed he was doing research, but I never knew what for. Roman was a weird kid. He reminded me of a fish. His eyes were too big, too far apart, and I swore his nose grew an inch every day. Sopping wet, he hauled himself out of the pool and slumped down beside me, dark blonde hair plastered over his eyes. Roman prodded me. He was always prodding me to get my attention, and it drove me insane. "What you looking for?" "Fish," I answered. He laughed, kicking his feet in the water. "Me too. Do you want me to help you find some?" I told him to go away, back to his own house, but Roman was allergic to the word no. He turned to me, blowing soaking strands of curls out of his eyes. "Okay, so can I watch you?" Roman nudged me, and I almost lost my balance. "I know what you're looking for. You know I'm not stupid." I had a feeling he had been eavesdropping over our broken fence. Before I could call my parents, he slipped back into the water. Roman wasn't a boy to trust. I accidentally told him I peed in the sea once, and by the next day, the entire class was calling me names. So I would have much preferred to search for marine life without him lurking around. I found all kinds of things in our pool. Starfish, the occasional jellyfish spilled over in the tide, and even a baby shark my mom had to rescue with a fishing net. But I never found what I was looking for. What my Grammy had searched for and ultimately given up on, and what Roman was catching on to. Fish people. Stay with me. Okay, so you should know my Grammy wasn't fully there after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of Alzheimer's. But she was also a very intelligent woman. For the most part, she was bedridden by the time I started elementary school. But the stories she used to tell me when she was awake kept me visiting, even when I knew deep down that I didn't want to watch her deteriorate. Her stories of encounters with fish people were worth it, worth the pain of staying by her side. I remember my 10th birthday. The power went out right in the middle of my favorite episode of Hannah Montana. Grammy was sleeping on the couch, tucked under blankets, and I was inhaling my ice cream birthday cake. When the storm blew out the TV, I abandoned my snack, remembering Mom's instructions in case a hurricane hit. I grabbed my flashlight, 2 bottles of water, snacks, and her meds, and helped Grammy down into the basement to wait it out. I was used to her staying silent, just sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees, her expression content. She was starting to forget my name. Some days I was Charlotte, then I was Charlie, and then I was a stranger. This wasn't one of those times. Grammy smiled at me, patted the space next to her, and said, "Can I tell you about the fish people, Charlotte?" Grammy didn't usually talk to me. It wasn't that she didn't want to, it was more that she couldn't. Mom explained it the best way she could, in a to-the-point Mom way. Blunt and realistic. I would have to come to terms with Grammy forgetting me. I didn't understand Alzheimer's, but I did understand the concept of forgetting. I started to notice it during visits. At first it was subtle. Grammy would forget to eat her dinner, or go to the bathroom. But then she started asking if I was a friend of her granddaughter. And painfully, so fucking painfully, she started asking who I was. I saw my Grammy deteriorate and I was helpless. Mom and Dad tried to put her into a home, but she insisted on staying by the sea. That's all she said. "I want to stay by the sea," she whispered, barely a breath, stuck in her favorite chair, her eyes growing more vacant, more frenzied and scared. What I didn't understand as a child was that this disease was cruel. It wasn't going to leave anything behind. It made her scream and cry, and in the later stages try and throw her hands at my mother, who she no longer recognized. "I want to die in the water. I want to die in the water. Let me die in the water." I think her words broke my parents' hearts. I knew I shouldn't have, but I kept visiting, even when it hurt. Even when the inevitable arrived, when she spoke less and less until she was barely speaking at all. I had gotten used to her calling me different names, random ones that came to mind. I got used to her snapping at me, then apologizing, then asking where her granddaughter was. I got used to imagining our conversations instead. The two of us would sit for hours, me lost in fantasy while she stared blankly at me. I would try not to cry, pretending to manifest conversations that were one-sided. She would ask about school, and I would say, "Oh yeah, it's fun." I would imagine her laugh, her voice saying, "I hope you're making lots of friends." "Yeah, Grammy, I am." I guess I got used to this blank side of her, like a ghost wearing my Grammy's face. When she spoke, I don't think I fully registered it. I watched the ceiling seem to sway as the emergency lights flickered on and off, shadows casting through the shutters reflecting across her face. The dull sound of howling wind and the rattling of the house's old foundations sent me into a panic. Grammy's house wasn't built for hurricanes, and I was terrified. The house groaned like a deep sea monster, and I felt helpless in the pit of its stomach. But this was the first time she had looked me directly in the eye and called me Charlotte. I was scared that this was the last conversation I would be having with her. "Fish people," I repeated, resisting the urge to bury my head in my knees. Across the room, wine bottles rattled on old wooden shelves. When one rolled onto the concrete floor and shattered on impact, something ice-cold slithered down my spine. Grammy nodded with a dreamlike smile. "I met him when I was your age," she said, reminiscing. "A beautiful boy from the sea, and I was going to marry him." She laughed, and it was a good laugh. It was Grammy's laugh. He asked me to be his queen, and we were going to run away together to his home under the ocean. Her voice grew somber, her unfocused eyes finding me. The lights flickered off, but I wasn't scared. Even when my Grammy became a faceless shadow, I was captivated by her story. When a magical boy promises to take you to a whole other world and promises marriage, what else is there to say except yes? I found myself smiling, comforted by her words, her effortless way of storytelling. I jumped up to grab my flashlight, holding it underneath my chin. Grammy continued. "His name was Sebastian," she murmured. "Such a beautiful man. His hair reminded me of seaweed, tangled and curling perfectly over eyes the color of stardust." I was fully invested in the story. Did he have a tail? She grinned, and her expression was so warm. So her. I felt my eyes sting. "He did," she whispered. "Giddy." Grammy curled her lip. I wanted to tell my friends, but he was very clear. She mimicked his voice, holding up her finger. "Clementine, you must promise me you will never reveal my secret to anyone." She found my gaze, her smile softening. I kept that promise. We made arrangements to run away together. He told me to meet him in the shallows at dawn underneath the sunrise, and I waited. Her tone, that had been so chipper, so happy, like she was reliving the memory, grew darker. I waited for him, sitting on the sand, my toes in the shallows, until sunrise turned to sunset. Her expression crumpled like she was going to cry. I waited. I never stopped waiting. Every day I would step into the shallows and wait for him to come back, even when I was unrecognizable to him, when I had aged way beyond what he knew. Grammy's smile was soft. "I want to die under the sea," she whispered, grasping for my hands. "So I can find him. Because I belong to the ocean, Charlotte." Her fingernails bit into my skin, wrinkled eyes already losing clarity, her grip tightening. "Can you help me find him?" As a 10-year-old, I was convinced I could find Sebastian for her. I stood in the shallows every morning for hours, shivering, calling out for him. I stupidly thought that if I told the sea my Grammy was sick, he would hear and come back. When I was starting middle school, Roman came over to ask my dad for spare fishing gear. Grammy's face lit up, her eyes widening. Sitting in her chair, she nearly toppled off. After not speaking for days or weeks, she was laughing. She thought he was Sebastian, pointing at him with frenzied eyes and laughing, saying, "You haven't changed. Sebastian, you're here." Roman left pretty quickly, shooting me a look before leaving. It became increasingly obvious I wasn't going to find Sebastian. I had this fantasy of taking my Grammy in her wheelchair all the way to the shore. The two of them would talk, and maybe he really could take her back to his world. But that was fiction. The reality was that I was losing my grandma to a disease with zero mercy, and instead of coming to terms with it, I hid in fantasy. Eventually, Mom told me, as gently as possible, that Grammy had deteriorated. As her disease progressed and reached the later stages, she insisted she could breathe underwater. That's what killed her. One day, Grammy waded into the ocean during a trip to the beach and never resurfaced. Mom and Dad were upset, but I was relieved. Grammy never wanted to die on land, so she had gotten what she wanted. Maybe I was still holding on to the possibility that Sebastian kept his promise. She left me the house. As well as letters to Sebastian, she never threw into the ocean. So during college, I spent every weekend there, dropping a letter a day into the surf. However, the house wasn't just mine. I was in class when I got a text from my favorite person. "I'm not cleaning the pool." In her will, to my confusion, my grandma had named Roman, yes, the weird fish-looking kid, as a co-owner of the house once we both turned 18. I thought it was a mistake, and so did my parents. But no, my grandma was very clear, naming him specifically because he just happened to resemble Sebastian. Dad was pissed, and he had every right to be. Roman wasn't even an acquaintance. I finally built up the courage to tell him I was looking for my Grammy's long-lost merman boyfriend, and of course he went and blabbed to the whole school. Thanks to him, kids were calling me Flounder right up to 8th grade. Roman, surprisingly, had a growth spurt, lost a ton of baby fat, and no longer looked like a fish, so lucky him, I guess. This guy teased me all the way to graduation about my Grammy's merman boyfriend. It's not like I didn't notice him at 16, standing alone in the shallows in the early hours of the morning, his gaze fixed on the surf as if searching for something. I caught him once, ankle deep, arms folded under a sunrise, a pack of fish sticks in his pocket, and at his feet, a lone fish stick dancing in the tide. He didn't say it directly, but I was pretty sure Roman was looking for Sebastian too. But then we both grew up. Roman's text was the icing on the cake of an already shitty day. It was his turn to clean the pool, as per our contract we made when we were 18, and relatively civil and on talking terms. Ever since starting college, he had become insufferable. Apparently, gaining a personality and love for literature and creative writing turns you into a sociopath. Roman missed my Grammy's anniversary 2 years in a row, lied to my parents about being sick both times, and used her house to throw parties. I cleaned the pool a month earlier, but apparently this guy had the memory of a goldfish. I texted back, "It's your turn." I wasn't expecting him to reply so fast. "I'm going to a party" was all he texted back, followed by a slew of crying emojis. "It's literally a pool. It's not hard Lomao." He followed up with "She's your grandma, Charlotte." Roman was right. She was my Grammy, so I had to take responsibility. On the night I arrived back at the house, a storm hit. It wasn't a bad one, but I did hide in the newly renovated basement just in case. I missed the old ancient vibe. Yes, the rattling shelves filled with bottles were a death trap waiting to happen. But I enjoyed picking up all of Grammy's ceramic fish ornaments, and the shells lining each wall. She told me the shells were gifts from Sebastian. Grammy left them to my mother, who gave them to a thrift store. Now the basement was more of a wine cellar, acting as a storage room. I was falling asleep on an old pile of boxes, but then I remembered I left the gate open. When my phone vibrated with a text that just said, "Shut the gate, idiot," I grabbed my flashlight and coat. When I got outside, the wind was already picking up. Kicking through storm debris, I skirted the pool's edge toward the gates. I stopped, almost skidding on a fallen deck chair, when I caught movement in the pool. Twinkling light spider webbing under the rippling surface. The pool lights weren't on. I dropped to my knees at the edge, scanning the water. Immediately I was a little kid again, scrambling for my old dollar store fishing net. I leaned closer, illuminating stray driftwood and an inflatable beach ball. Here, fishy, fishy. The pretty iridescent glow under the water was not my flashlight. I clicked it off, balancing myself on the edge, following the greenish light prickling under the surface. I had a sudden spontaneous idea to slip off my shoes and wade into the water. When I retracted back on my heels, I caught movement again, a shadow lurking just underneath the blue. Before it broke through, 2 eyes staring directly at me. Roman. I blinked, and then I shuffled back on my hands and knees, knocking my flashlight into the water. It wasn't Roman. It was a guy, my age, early 20s. I detected annoyance in his expression, amusement flickering on his lips. Thick brown curls stuck to his forehead tangled with seaweed, a crown of driftwood and sea glass. Slowly my gaze dropped into the pool, finding his torso, which ended just below his waist. The boy came closer, head inclining. When the water moved lapping around him, I glimpsed his legs fused together behind him, slimy scales bleeding into something more akin to a tail. When he grasped the pool walls, his eyes finding mine, I realized he was in pain. I saw the thick trail of red diluting the surface, blood splatters painting the pool walls. He was hurt. I held my finger up to signal him to wait, and waded into the pool to grab my flashlight. I was already off balance, waist deep in the shallow end. When a violent gust of wind sent me toppling in head first, I felt his hands coming around me and dragging me to the surface. I plucked my flashlight and clicked it on, illuminating the pool, a trail of blood smearing blue tiles. When I tried to help him, he was surprisingly less timid than I had expected. He showed me his tail tangled in my dad's old fishing net. His body was slimy to the touch, a full fishtail. He was human, with skin all the way up to his torso, where a greenish slime took over, bleeding into scales that sculpted the rest of him. When I checked his injury, a large gash was taken out of his left fin. His blood looked just like mine. I told him to roll onto his side, and he looked confused. Before doing so, I ran my fingers over bluish carvings just below his ribs, my hands trembling. Gills. This guy was the real deal, which meant my grandma was telling the truth. When I was finished checking him over, I had an idea. Grammy had an old-fashioned bathtub in the downstairs bathroom. If I could get him out of the storm and inside, I could treat him. I asked him if I could pull him out. The boy looked surprised but nodded. He didn't speak, only stabbing at his throat with his index finger before holding out his hand, entangling his fingers with mine. His eyes were frightened but determined. I dragged him out of the pool before grabbing a bucket, filling it up, and soaking him. I was conscious of Granny's words when speaking about Sebastian in his fish form. Children of the sea must be soaked through at all times. If not, they will suffocate. I had asked her how long Sebastian could maintain human legs, and her eyes darkened. Legs are a last resort. The boy was already breathless, his eyes flickering, unfocused gaze on the sky. I soaked him, grabbed his hands, and promised him I was going to save him. The last thing I wanted was for this merman to suffocate on land. So I grabbed his arms, made sure to soak him every few minutes, and dragged him inside the house and into the downstairs bathroom. It took all of my upper body strength, and almost sent me falling on my ass, but I managed to haul him into the tub and fill it up. His injuries weren't too bad now. I had the luxury of light. I knelt on the edge of the tub, watching damaged scales healing, reforming themselves over skin. The way they moved, his skin turning blue, then green, hardening into scales, reminded me of a virus, a slow spreading sheen of slime creeping over his flesh. His tail was the most surprising. I expected it to be a fully formed fin, but when I looked closer, I swore I could see traces of bones jutting underneath, almost resembling legs. I tended to him all night, checking and rechecking the temperature of the tub. When I noticed him shivering, I added some warm water, and he seemed content, leaning over the edge, his chin resting on his arms. "So you're Sebastian?" I asked him, when I'd bandaged up his fin. The boy shook his head, raising a brow like he was offended. I asked him his name, but he didn't respond, more interested in my shampoo bottles. He poked one and it dropped into the bath. The boy shot me a frightened look, and I picked one up. "It's shampoo," I said, prodding my ponytail. "It's for your hair." He nodded slowly, but I noticed him inching away from them. I talked to him for a while, enjoying his presence. I kept him company, telling him about my Grammy stories and Sebastian. He was a little too big for the tub, his tail flopping over the side, but he seemed comfortable, resting his arms on the side, squinting his eyes and nodding at the wrong times. I thought it was adorable, the way he at least pretended to understand me. When he zoned out, dipping his head under the water and blowing bubbles, I figured he was hinting at me to shut up. Halfway through an anecdote, though, I started to get breathless. I thought I was just tired. I had been up all night, and I could see the first glimmers of sunrise outside the window. But suddenly, my chest felt tight, all the breath sucked from my lungs. I thought I was getting sick, maybe the flu, before my legs gave way and I dropped onto the floor like being severed from strings. I remember trying to move, trying to breathe, but I couldn't, my mouth opening, lips parting, gasping. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fucking breathe. It's like there was no oxygen in the room. My lungs were starving. Breathing was suddenly so fucking hard. I sucked in as much air as I could, but my body rejected it, contorting as I rolled onto my stomach. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, blood running thick down my chin. I could feel something alive, something wriggling, writhing down my throat. When my lungs contracted, my mouth filled with the taste of salt. I flopped onto my back, my vision blurring in and out, blood-tinged water spluttering from my lips and pooling around me. A slow, spreading puddle gave me life when I rolled into it, forcing my numb body back to flickering consciousness. Fucking finally. His voice was like ocean waves echoing in my skull. I rolled onto my side and I remember feeling like the water was air. The water was giving me oxygen. There was a loud splash and then wet slapping footsteps moving towards me. Through spotty vision, I saw his tail splitting apart into slimy masses, undulating scales writhing over bones bleeding into legs, a horrific, deformed mimic of a human body. I felt ice-cold, slimy hands leeching around my ankles. "I thought you were never going to stop talking," he laughed. "Your grandmother said you were a talker, but wow." I caught his sparkling grin. She was right though. Dad says I can't be king without a queen. The merman's nails bit into me. His words felt like needles being stuck into me. And your grandmother said you would be the perfect bride, Charlotte. I watched his feet stumble, tripping over himself as he dragged me toward the door. He had human feet. The only thing not human was the green fleshy substance growing on his soles. I felt his arms around me, lifting me into the air and dropping me into the pool. I plunged down, expecting my lungs to relax now that I was in water, my skin and throat and lungs craving it. Instead though, my body had a very human reaction, immediately clawing for air. I broke the surface, choking up clumps of blood, and found myself face to face with the merman sitting on the side of the pool. The boy's lip curled as he watched my legs struggle to stay afloat. 15 minutes, Charlotte, he murmured, casually crossing one scaled leg over the other. He surveyed me with a mix of confusion and amusement, cocking his head. That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs. He leaned forward, kicking his feet in the water. So, I'm not sure I understand what's going on right now. I found my voice choked at the back of my throat. You can talk, I managed to hiss out. He shrugged, rolling his eyes. Well, yeah, I have a mouth, so yes, I can talk. I asked him if he knew my grandma, and his expression brightened. I do. His smile was smug. She told me you would make a wonderful bride. The merman's words stung. Granny would never say that. So she found him? I pushed. Did my grandmother find Sebastian? Before he could answer, however, a shadow loomed behind him. The shadow mouthed, "What the fuck?" Roman. Wide-eyed and clutching a bottle of vodka, he stood in shorts and a tee, a pair of Ray-Bans pinning back thick, sandy hair. He looked like he just stumbled out of a spring break party, but he wasn't drunk. Or maybe he was, but sober enough to recognize that I was in trouble. I think he meant to attack the merman, but the boy was too fast, spinning around and clawing at his face. Luckily, Roman had the upper hand, with the merman already balancing on the edge, not yet used to human feet. Thank God he had common sense, shoving the fish boy into the pool. The boy hit the water with a loud splash, and Roman staggered back. When the merman dove under, his tail slapping the sides of the pool, my friend dropped to his knees on the edge, holding out his hand for me to grab. I grasped for his wrist, my body already protesting leaving water. "Tell me I'm still tripping," Roman whispered, when he pulled me toward him. I could only shake my head, choking on stinging air that was lashing my lungs. "Well, what the fuck is going on? What is that?" he hissed, hauling me out of the pool. I collapsed face down, gasping for breath, rolling onto my back. For a moment I was disoriented, my body caught between the water and the air, unsure which it needed more. My lungs contracted, already craving the depths, but once I had spluttered up half a gallon of blood-stained water, my body flopped back down. Finally, I could breathe again. Instead of speaking, I shuffled back on my hands and knees and gestured for Roman to grab a bucket. I pointed to the pool, and then to myself, my voice still stuck in my throat, tangled on my tongue. Roman filled the bucket and then dumped the contents over my head. I found my breath, thankfully, and then my voice. "Do I have gills?" I whispered, running my fingers down my torso. "Do you have what?" "Gills." I said through my teeth. Check my back. I shivered when he dragged his nails down my back. No? You don't have gills, dude. I checked myself over, almost obsessively searching for that greenish slime creeping over my skin, but I was clear. It's a fish person, I answered Roman's earlier question. His eyes widened, the bucket slipping from his fingers. Sebastian. I noticed the merman had drawn blood across his cheek, 3 deep gashes. I'm fine, he said. When I started forward, Roman prodded the scratch gingerly, his gaze on the pool. Where did he go? I followed his eyes, catching movement underneath. He was hiding. Roman studied the water, his tongue in his cheek. So your grandma's homicidal merman friend Sebastian came to what? Murder you? I didn't respond, slowly getting to my knees and dragging my fingers across the surface. You know my grandmother. I spoke to the water, ignoring Roman's warnings to stay away from the edge. But my grandma died when I was in middle school. She walked into the sea and never came back. The water rippled, but the merman didn't break through. There's no way you know my grandma, I gritted out. So what the fuck are you? It hit me then that Grammy really did drown. This thing was fucking with my head. The merman only shot me a knowing smile. Roman disappeared for a moment, reappearing with a bottle of water. He downed the whole thing, scrunching it up and throwing it in the pool. Hey asshole, he said, answer her questions. I spent the next few minutes questioning an empty pool. The merman had taken a vow of silence. I didn't notice at first. I was too busy waiting for the merman to make his next move. But Roman, sitting cross-legged next to me, had gone through 3 bottles of water in under 5 minutes. It was only when I noticed the slight tinge of green crawling over his left cheek when I realized something was very wrong. Roman was halfway through his 4th bottle of water when I whacked it out his hand. He looked at me in confusion, slowly tilting his head, before dropping onto his stomach and slurping up the spilled water, letting out heavy pants like he couldn't breathe. Roman, I tried to pull him to his feet, but he didn't respond, rolling around in the stemming puddle. I jumped up, grabbed his ankles, and dragged him away from the pool. Fuck, Roman finally spluttered, coughing something up. I can't breathe. His short, panting gasps turned into heaves for breath. Rolling him onto his side in the recovery position, I waited for him to start puking up water, but he didn't. His cheeks were sickly pale, almost gaunt, like something was sucking the life out of him. When I grabbed Roman's leg, I saw it, like a virus, rippling over his bare flesh. In a panic, I plucked off a slimy scale, but another grew in its place, then another, his skin hardening into a marble-like substance, bleeding into fish-like scales. He's going to suffocate, you know? A voice startled me. The merman was leaning over the edge of the pool, chin resting on his fist. Right now, his body is changing, and if you don't let it, his lungs will reject the change, shrivel up, and the host will die. I was paralyzed before it hit me. When Roman's eyes flickered, his body jerked, his legs fusing together, bones undulating, I realized I had no choice but to push him into the water. I think I apologized or tried to, my heart in my throat. I tried to roll him into the pool, but the merman hissed. No, he needs the sea, the boy said sternly. If you want him to breathe long enough to get him into the sea, you need to slice into his lower back and his neck. Roman was conscious enough to protest, squeezing out a no. Are you fucking serious? Don't touch me. His voice dropped into a snarl, eyes rolling back. But I had no choice. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen. With trembling hands, I sliced straight through Roman's throat, and to my relief, he let out a strangled gasp for breath. His eyes flew open. He was breathing. Digging deeper, blood splattered my face, ice cold and wrong. But something else hit me, and my body immediately entered fight or flight. I screamed, dropping the knife and shuffling back, grasping my face to make sure they weren't on me. It took me a moment to realize what I was staring at. Wriggling between flaps of flesh were tiny worm-like things, filling him, gushing out of the cut. When they made contact with air, they started to shrivel up and dry, going still. Dancing tendrils crumbled apart, spiderwebbing down Roman's neck. I wasn't talking to a merman. Sebastian was never a merman. A magical being who lived under the ocean. My Grammy and I had been talking to parasites that had taken over human bodies. They forced the body to adapt to water, to crave water, and then drown them. The merman didn't want a queen to marry. I felt sick, my stomach contorting. You only drown men, I said, the words tumbling from my mouth. When the merman inclined its head, I knew exactly what it was thinking. "You can tell the difference between us," I said, "so you wait to see if we will change." "You've gotta be fucking kidding me." Roman was coughing, spluttering, his eyes wide. But even conscious, he was crawling toward the pool, toward water, dragging himself, like the thing inside him was in full control. I grabbed him before he could, scooping him into my arms. He was so light, his legs already half transformed, glued together into a tail. "He needs to drown in the sea," the merman said. "He needs water, or hell die." The boy's smile was filled with thread-like worms. "The body doesn't have long." As if emphasizing his words, Roman's body was jerking in my arms, trying to get back to water. His eyes were in his, quivering lips screaming at me to throw him in. With zero choice, I pulled the merman out of the pool with one hand. With Roman dying in my arms, I carried him all the way to the shallows and let him slip into the water. The merman instructed me to fully slash open his throat so his body could adapt. When I couldn't, the merman did it for me, slashing open his throat, carving gills into marble-like flesh. Roman flopped into blood-stained water, gasping, sobbing, rolling onto his front. He begged me not to let him go. But already his voice was different, dropping down in octaves, his eyes unblinking, staring at me. I told Roman it was okay and that he was just going to sleep. By the time he lay on his stomach, a tail pushing out through his mangled legs, he blinked at me like I was a stranger. The merciful thing would have been to kill him, to stop the parasites writhing beneath his skin, already coiling around his iris. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, watching my friends suffocate on land. I watched the merman drag him out into the ocean, the two of them disappearing under the surf. I wanted to believe that the parasite didn't take all of them. The merman seemed to retain human speech. Maybe Roman would be the same. I went home and took 3 showers, scrubbing my body until I was screaming. I cleaned up the blood in the pool, splattered on the tiles. And then I fucking cried. Roman's disappearance was ruled a drowning. A year later, it's spring break and my parents have been trying to convince me to rent out the house to college kids. I've been refusing. I don't want anyone near the pool. I clean it every weekend, but I can't bring myself to actually use it. I've been researching what exactly I encountered. The closest I've come to is the horsehair worm, a parasitic thing that manipulates the host's behavior to drown themselves. But this thing only infects sea insects. It's harmless to humans. So, what infected Roman and the merman? Is this an evolved version? The symptoms are exactly the same. Horsehair parasites. All parasites lay eggs to reproduce. So why was this one so obsessed with finding a female? 3 days ago, my parents managed to convince me to rent it out for the summer. I came down to check it in the morning, half asleep. Mom and Dad are visiting to see if it needs any renovations. I was planning to let a group of middle schoolers splash around in it for a girl's birthday. Stepping out into the yard, the first thing I noticed was the cement patio was soaking. And there he was, casually leaning against the pool edge, chin resting on his arms. His tail lapped the water fully formed, a greenish blue. I don't know why my Grammy described the tails as magical and breathtaking. She didn't see the reality of Sebastian. There was nothing magical about the parasite clinging to my friend's body. A cruel mimic of what this thing thought a tail was. Human bones contorted and forcibly molded and shaped to adapt. There was nothing beautiful about his unblinking colorless eyes staring at me. Nothing enchanting about the crown of sea glass forced onto his head. Beads of velvety red staining his temples, or the strands of seaweed tangled in his hair. I saw him for what he really was, a drowned husk of flesh infested with a parasite. There was no recognition in his expression, and yet he was still here, in the pool he had been playing in as a child. I wanted to believe it was his memories bringing him back to a familiar place. But then I saw the wriggling, thread-like things lapping around him. With a grin, Roman slipped under the surface, his tail splashing water in my face. I called my parents with shaking hands, canceling the visit. I messaged the kids not to bother. But already, the gate was flying open, excited footsteps slapping across the patio. The first kid cannonballed, followed by another and another. They kept coming, like they were drawn to my pool. Townspeople, throwing themselves into the depths, except they didn't resurface. I ran back inside and locked myself in my room. I'm terrified this thing is spreading. It's been an hour since I locked myself in here. It's so quiet, I'm too scared to look outside. I can't stop thinking about the merman's words. 15 minutes. That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs. Everyone thinks I killed my own brother, but I didn't. As I walk into the police station, I notice the officer's eyes on me, watching every move, judging. Did she do it? Did she really kill her own brother? That's the question on everyone's mind after Greg died last week. He fell to his death from the 11th floor apartment where we live with our mother. Neighbors mentioned a heated argument between us right before it happened, and the media ate it up. An older, polite officer approaches and gestures for me to follow him into the interview room. He motions for me to sit. "I'm sorry about all this, Miss Lana," he says, flipping through some papers in a folder. "But we need to get everything straight in this case." I nod. He asks if I'm sure I don't want a lawyer. I confirm it. He sets the papers aside and opens a small notebook, a pen resting inside. "Can you tell me how your relationship with your brother was?" That's a tricky question, but I tell him the truth. It wasn't great. My brother was controlling and aggressive from a young age. He used to steal my things and threaten me with a small knife he took from our father to keep me quiet. He was expelled from 2 schools, once for beating a kid until he passed out, and another because he set fire to an entire classroom when a teacher refused to change his grade. He was very close to our father, and when he died, Greg got worse, much worse. To the officer, I give a lighter version of the story. I don't want to seem like I hated my brother. He writes it down, slowly. "And your mother?" "My mother is incredible," I explain, feeling a pang of emotion. "She raised us mostly alone, doing her best. Our father was difficult." "I can only imagine the pain she's going through," he interrupts in a calm voice, locking eyes with me. Losing another family member like that, only a few years after he died. It was clear in his eyes that he thought I had done it. Offed my brother, you know. Then came the golden question. "Can you recount the events of that night as you remember?" I tell him it's mostly a blur, but I'll do my best. Greg did something stupid, like leaving the milk out or not washing the dishes. I confronted him, and he exploded, yelling. His voice sounded off. Maybe he had been drinking. He cursed and threatened me. I went to my room and moments later heard a thud, followed by my mother breaking down in tears. The officer doesn't write anything this time and drops his pen. "That's not the whole truth, is it, Miss Lana?" His head tilts slightly as if he's caught me in a lie. "There were scratch marks on his arm, likely from a struggle," he continues. "We haven't tested the DNA yet, but I have a strong feeling we'll get a match." He glances at my hands, where a few nails are broken at the tips. That doesn't make much sense to me. I challenge, though. His direct approach catches me off guard. He gives me a knowing look and picks up his pen again, flipping through his notes. "Do you know a girl named Abigail? Someone your brother was recently involved with?" I gulp. He knows. "So I guess you do," he says with a smirk. "She filed a report against your brother the day before his death. Did you know that?" "No, I didn't." I fake surprise. "What happened?" "She reported an attempted murder." He reads from the file. "Greg beat her so badly she was barely recognizable. She only survived because she managed to escape his car." "That's disturbing." "You're right. And you knew already, didn't you? She told us she warned you the morning he died." He leans forward, watching my reaction. I don't say anything. I start to wonder if refusing a lawyer was a mistake. "And there is one more girl, Jenna," he continues. "His ex. She had been missing for a few months, but we recently found her dismembered body by a dirt road." My eyes widen. I didn't know the details, but I feared this might have happened. "We suspect there are more." He leans back, his posture hinting at sympathy for me. "It's time to bring justice to these women. I know this is probably why you pushed him that night." Before he finishes, I stand up and ask if I'm under arrest. He shakes his head. "Then I'll leave now," I say, walking to the door. "I hope I've helped." I leave the station with tears in my eyes. Those poor girls, what had he done to them? How could he be so much like our father? My mother is waiting right in front of the main entrance, sitting on a bench. Her face lights up when she sees me, and we hug tightly. I'll never tell them what she did that night. How she saved me from Greg as he held a razor to my throat, gripping my neck by the window after I confronted him about those women. How she pushed him without hesitation, sending her own son to his death. How, a few years ago, she poisoned our father to also end his endless cycle of abuse and violence. Mom believed it was over when she killed him, but it wasn't. Greg followed in his father's footsteps. Maybe now she can finally have some peace, though it came at such a high price. "Let's go home," she murmurs, her voice heavy with sorrow gripping my hand, and we go. There's a gig app that pays disturbingly well. Stay away from it at all costs. You won't find the app in any of the app stores, and even a Google search doesn't turn up results. To download it, you need to scan the QR referral code of someone who's already using the app. That feature makes it feel like you're joining an exclusive club. If a friend offers to let you scan their code, under no circumstances should you take them up on it. That friend is as good as dead to you. Trust me when I say from experience, this isn't a club you want to be a member of. Whatever you do, do not download it. I was at the bar with my buddy Matt when he convinced me to download the app. We're both broke with a ton of student loans, so aside from the occasional $2 pint night at our local dive, drinking anything other than store-bought booze was a rarity for us. But Matt had said a celebration was in order and that he was paying, which was enough to get me off of my couch for happy hour. He milked the situation, refusing to tell me exactly what we were celebrating until we were a few beers in. Sick of waiting for an explanation, I guessed it was a new job, and Matt gave a mischievous grin. "It's way better than that," he said. "It's an app called Task. I rolled my eyes. We both tried every gig app out there. When I get sick of switching between Uber and Lyft, and watching sorority girls puke out of the back seat of my car, I drive for DoorDash for a few weeks until the smell of fast food started to make me nauseous. After that, I'd hustle for gigs on Fiverr, or pick up odd jobs on TaskRabbit. Then the cycle would start over again. Most days, my circumstances felt inescapable. The last thing I needed was another app to slowly chip away at my sanity as I struggled to cobble together enough cash to cover rent and utilities. I told Matt as much. "Screw those other apps," Matt said. "This is the easiest money I've ever made." I have to admit I was intrigued. Matt never gets excited about anything, so part of me wanted to see what had turned him into a die-hard so fast. The other part of me was gullible enough to believe there might actually be such a thing as easy money that didn't involve the lottery or an inheritance. It didn't take much badgering from Matt before I scanned his code and clicked the link. The link took me to a nondescript website with nothing but a download button. Seconds later, the app was on my phone. The app itself was bare bones, like Venmo, but with even fewer frills. Nothing but a few tabs. One for my own QR referral should I want to pass it along, one for linking my bank account, and one showing my current balance of $0. In the middle of the otherwise mostly blank screen were the words, "You have no new tasks." Before I could accuse Matt of tricking me into downloading malware, he cut me off. "I know what you're thinking, but just wait for a task," he said. I was sketched out too after Rachel referred me. The fact that Rachel was using it eased my concerns. Rachel's this girl Matt hooks up with. On occasion, I'd only met her a few times at Matt's, but from what I could tell, she didn't seem like the type of person to get into anything that wasn't legit. Aside from the fact that she went to film school, so she has even more debt than we do with fewer employable skills to show for it. "When you say the easiest money you've ever made," I asked, trailing off. "I've already made $800 since downloading it yesterday, and that's not counting the referral fee you just got me. I hope they paid you well to rope me into your weird pyramid scheme," I joked. "Yeah, they did." Matt held up his own app to show me $1,000 had just been deposited into his account. "Jesus, is that for real?" "The money transfers, if that's what you're asking. If this ends up being a scam, at least I know how much our friendship is worth to you." "Oh, they way overpaid then," he said. He laughed and flagged down the bartender for another round. We moved on to chatting about movie trailers and how there was barely anything coming out that we wanted to see. I'd almost forgotten about the app altogether when my phone buzzed 20 minutes later with my first task. I read it and reread it, mystified and more than a little creeped out by the words on the screen. "Piss on the bathroom floor. You have 5 minutes to complete the task." "Dude, you made it seem like I'd be less sketched out when I got my first task," I said. "Is this a joke? What kind of sick person created this?" Matt read my task and snorted. "Yeah, that's a weird one, but $100 is $100. I looked at my phone again. Sure enough, the app was offering me $100 for the task. Below that, a timer was counting down, already at 4:27. "There's no way I'm doing that for $100. "So wait for one that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside," Matt said. "Or what? Piss on the floor that someone's going to have to clean? You know how many guys are going to end up doing that tonight anyway. At least you get paid for it. It's a dick move. People are dicks all the time. Have you gotten one like this?" "The first one I got was knocking over a display stand at Publix." "And you did it?" "For $50, hell yeah I did. It was no big deal." I apologized and went on with my day. How are you not more creeped out by this whole thing? How does it even know where we are or that you've completed the task? The same way every app does, by spying on you, using location sharing to see who you're with. I mean, how does Instagram know to show me ads for tampons every time I hang out with you? You're an asshole. Matt shrugged. Who is even paying for this? Like, it doesn't make sense. All the other gig apps are connecting workers with clients and taking a cut. There's no upside to this for anyone but the people who do the tasks. My money's on Zuck, or some other billionaire. Think about it. They're bored of all the luck stuff. They've got more money than anyone could spend in a lifetime. What else are they gonna use it for but to laugh at all the dumb shit people will do if you pay them? Yeah, I'm not really interested in being part of someone's messed up social experiment. I checked my phone again. The timer was down to a little over 2 minutes. I scanned the app for a decline button but didn't see one. How do I decline the task? I asked. No clue, I haven't declined one. Since there wasn't an option to decline, I decided to test the app. If someone wanted to mess with me, I'd mess with them right back. I went to the bathroom but didn't do anything. Just waited a minute, washed my hands and returned to the bar. I checked my phone just as the timer ran out. A frowny face appeared on screen, then the app went black. Matt's phone buzzed a few seconds later. He checked it and laughed. What? Did you get a task? What is it? Matt smirked at me before holding out his phone for me to read. I barely had time to register the words "slap your friend" before I felt Matt's hand connect with my face. The smack jolted me off balance, and I jumped up to keep from falling over. What the fuck? I could feel everyone staring at us. I couldn't tell if my cheek was burning from the slap or the embarrassment. Matt held up his hands in apology. And sorry dude, but $200 was too good to pass up. Having seen the exchange, the bartender made his way over with an annoyed look. I think that's enough for you two, the bartender said. All good, Matt replied. Well, just close out. The bartender shook his head and went to the register to ring Matt up. Matt's phone buzzed again as the bartender returned with the check. Matt checked it and winced. Then he took a big swig of beer and spit it like a fountain all over the bartender. The bartender turned red as security stormed over and grabbed Matt by the back of his shirt, dragging him towards the door. Sorry, Matt said. It was just a joke. Hope it was funny 'cause you're 86 days. Sign the tab and tip him good, Matt called back to me as security shoved him outside. I picked up the pen to sign the tab when my phone buzzed on the bar top. I saw the alert from Task and told myself not to check it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it. The task read, "Do not leave a tip. Write 'fuck you' instead." Every alarm bell in my head was going off. This went well beyond location sharing and listening in on conversations. I looked around the bar, sure I'd find someone in here watching us, pulling the strings to see how far we could be pushed. But I didn't see anyone who didn't seem to be here for a normal bar outing, and the way everyone was side-eyeing me like I was an exhibit in a freak show suggested they were not in on whatever was happening. I looked back at my phone. $250 to write "fuck you" instead of leaving a tip. I felt my face flush with shame as I wrote the words, but I had to know if this was for real or not. I was positive I'd walk outside to find Matt had been screwing with me, somehow faking the alerts. I turned the receipt face down and scurried out before anyone could read what I'd written. By the time I stepped outside, the app was alerting me that I was now $250 richer. In the midst of so many emotions, and my desire to get away, at the time it didn't cross my mind that, out of all the sketchy aspects of the app, I just encountered the biggest red flag of all. That slap from Matt wasn't a random task. It was a warning. Not following orders had consequences. Matt wanted to go somewhere else and keep celebrating our good luck, as he called it, but once the adrenaline faded, I felt hungover and on edge, so I went home. The whole thing felt wrong on multiple levels, so I decided not to go on the app for a while. Still, I needed some proof that the whole thing wasn't a hoax, so I transferred the money to my bank, and sure enough, it showed up. As easy as the money had been, I had a knot in my stomach about it, though I struggled to articulate why. Part of it was being watched, all the unanswered questions about who was behind the app and why anyone would create it, but I think something about it also felt manipulative, like I was just a puppet in some messed up game I didn't understand. But I can't deny I'd felt an immediate rush along with whatever pang of guilt came from stiffing the bartender, like the app had tapped into some impulse I hadn't even known was there. Did I want to do that? Had the app made me take the smallest step towards some darkness lurking inside of me? I accepted some rideshare requests, hoping to distract myself. But even those reminded me how I was trapped driving, having leased a car to be able to drive for the apps and now needing to accept a certain number of rides to make my payments each month. It wasn't even midnight before I found myself shampooing the floor mats in the back seat after some drunk kid puked on the ride home from a bar. Screw this, I thought. I opened task and waited. No task showed up. I refreshed the app, but still nothing. I figured they just didn't have the bandwidth to monitor the app 24/7, but looking back, again, I think it was conditioning me to want more tasks. Like the app was negging me, making me feel unworthy so I'd be grateful when it paid attention to me again. It wasn't until the next day that a new task showed up. I won't bore you with all the details of the tasks I accepted over the next few days to chip away at my debt, except to say that they seemed mostly mundane, if pretty dickish. At first, they were basic things like spitting gum where someone's guaranteed to step in it, bumping into a kid with ice cream so they drop it, ringing someone's doorbell in the middle of the night and ditching. I realize now that they were escalating, though I barely noticed at the time. 72 hours after refusing to piss on a bathroom floor, I was doing things like taking a package off a neighbor's porch and tossing it in the dumpster, and calling a random number to leave a message telling someone their sister had died. Robert Cialdini wrote this book, Influence, that I read a while back. In it he talks about the psychological tactic enemy soldiers used to turn patriotic American POWs against their own country. See, no true patriot will immediately talk crap about their homeland, but if you can get them to admit that the US isn't perfect, it's a slippery slope. Something in the mind makes you double down on things you said in the past. So once they'd admitted the US wasn't perfect, they were willing to talk about the flaws in more detail. With a bit of patience, the enemy soldiers would have American POWs publicly denouncing American values altogether. They never even noticed the concessions they were making until it was too late to turn back. Like those soldiers, I didn't fully recognize that I was leaping across lines I never would have crossed before. Matt introduced me to the app. The first time I truly had a chance to recognize how far I'd strayed arrived about a week after I accepted the first task. I hadn't gone back to my other gig apps since the vomit incident. I made way too much accepting tasks for what felt like far less effort. But for whatever reason, I still don't like to think of myself as a gig worker. Yes, I take gigs, but knowing I might need something on my resume, I occasionally work part-time for a company doing data entry. It's already mind-numbing work for a little above minimum wage, but returning to it this time was downright painful. Up to this point, I had had to leave the app open in the background for it to assign me tasks, but halfway through the morning my phone lit up with a notification even though I was pretty sure I had closed the app and my phone was on focus mode. The funny thing is, I had been wishing for something to break the monotony of the work, and here it was, my desire fulfilled. Email redacted folder name to redacted email address. You have 90 seconds to complete the task. My pulse quickened as I read the notification. On the one hand, I knew it was wrong and probably illegal. On the other hand, as far as I had been told, the company did not deal in sensitive information that would interest the public. The bulk of the data I even had access to was mundane user analytics, the company sold to advertisers. I quickly rationalized the task, though I suspected it would likely be the end of my working there. I'd already decided to do it before I even registered that it paid a whopping $2,000, by far the most I'd been offered for any task up to that point. It took all of 30 seconds before the money was on its way to my bank account. I got a huge hit of adrenaline, something I'd started to crave lately, my head buzzing. I focused as much as I could until lunch. Upon my return, I wasn't remotely fazed to learn my supervisor wanted to see me in her office. She was shockingly nice about the entire thing. She did not immediately fire me, though she was well within her right to. Instead, she gave me a chance to explain myself. A look of confusion came over her when I declined, and she politely let me go. Like I said, I had been told by her specifically that we did not deal in particularly sensitive information, so the way she handled the whole thing tracked. But when I looked back one final time, I saw something on her face that made me think otherwise. Dread. She looked terrified. The next day I understood why, when I saw on the news that the company was shuttering its doors after a data breach. The pang of guilt I felt over potentially costing a lot of people their jobs was quickly replaced by a fear of the possible repercussions. I wondered if I would be thrown under the bus in the company's attempts to cover their tail. As if it could read my mind, my phone lit up with a notification informing me I'd received a $5,000 employee loyalty bonus. The familiar mix of elation at the huge payday and not inducing chills from being involved in something so strange crept in, and I managed to shake off any remorse I felt. I fell into the now routine act of rationalizing away what I had done. Whereas before I had told myself no one was really getting hurt by my actions, this time I focused on the fact that clearly the company had been doing something shady, or else a seemingly innocuous folder wouldn't have been enough to bring them down. Fuck them for doing something that put me in this position in the first place, I thought. It wasn't the first time I had gotten angry that week. Getting angry anytime guilt or shame started to creep in over a task had become a pattern for me. Like a lot of you reading this, I did what I was supposed to do. I went to college. I studied something useful, but the jobs in what I studied were mostly in bigger cities, far away from family circumstances that required me to be close to home. And even if I could have moved, the entry-level pay wouldn't have covered the cost of living before I took my loans into account. It didn't matter what I did or where I went, life was shaping up to be one big hamster wheel. Everywhere around me, I heard folks complaining about how hard it was to find good workers who care about the job, who are loyal. Well, what did they think was going to happen when they filled our heads with dreams of cushy office jobs and home ownership, loaded us up on debt, and then offered us one fucking way to pay it off, by staring at a register or screen doing absolute bullshit for $15 an hour, if we're lucky for 10 to 12 hours a day. We were sold a bill of goods. The American dream is dead and gone, but the older generations are still doling out advice based on their experience of a steady paycheck and a reasonable mortgage. And on the flip side, every time we open a fucking app, some rich influencer is saying that if we follow our passion, we'll find more freedom and success than we ever thought possible. But both sides are speaking from a place of having already found success, and every single one of them is positive. The only thing that factors into that success is good old hard work. So of course, most of us end up juggling multiple gigs, trapped in the hustle economy. At least that way we have some semblance of control over our lives. Sure, we have crippling student loans that our best hope of paying off is the government stepping in to forgive. And yeah, buying even an outhouse is a pipe dream, but at least we get to clock in and clock out as we want, quit when we get bored, give rides or deliver food, YOLO what little we have into crypto, or curate our own social feeds on the off chance fortune might rain down on us and lift us out of the endless grind. I'm not proud of how little I hesitated accepting these tasks. It legitimately felt like, for the first time, I had a way out of the rat race. So what if I had to be a dick to do it? Jeff Bezos wouldn't even let his employees take a proper bathroom break, and look where he ended up. Not long after I thought I had perfected the art of justifying my actions, I got the task that finally changed my mind. The day before I downloaded the app, I had made plans for the following weekend with the woman I'd matched with on Hinge. I'd been anxious about the date when I committed to it, worried we'd be limited to the cheapest margaritas I could afford along with complimentary chips and salsa. Telling my dates I'd had a late lunch and wasn't hungry enough for dinner had become my go-to move on the dating scene, but that night was different because I could finally afford to go somewhere nice. I texted her back to let her know we were still on and told her where to meet me. We met up at a spot local foodies love and hit it off immediately. When I say it was the best date I've ever been on, I'm not exaggerating. We bonded over the things we had in common, laughed our asses off ribbing each other about the things we disagreed on, and kept the tapas and fancy cocktails flowing for 2 hours before things went south. When my date announced she needed to use the restroom, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. As she was walking away, I checked the task I'd just been assigned. Tell the woman in red to hurry up and get it over with. I looked around the restaurant and saw a woman in a red coat sitting alone a few tables over. She was lost in thought, running a finger around the rim of her martini glass. I checked my phone again and frowned in confusion. Get what over with? I didn't consider the question for long enough. I had gotten greedy. I happily ignored all the details about the woman that might have stopped me from going over there. It didn't seem like it could possibly be that big a deal, but the payout alone should have been enough of a red flag. If I'd received $7,000 in total to destroy a company, how innocent could a task worth $10,000 have been? I got up and walked over. I was already speaking before the woman even realized I was there. Hurry up and get it over with, I said. I registered shock on her face as my words sunk in, but she didn't say a word. I didn't say anything else, just returned to my seat. What was that about? My date asked, having seen the exchange as she came back from the bathroom. Oh, nothing, I said, staring at my phone expectantly. Don't worry about it. I grinned as my phone alerted me that I was $10,000 richer. What should we order next? But my date wasn't looking at me. She was staring in horror as the woman in red left the restaurant in tears. We didn't have a view of the street outside, but we could clearly hear the screech of tires and the screams of patrons close enough to the window to see the woman in red walk into oncoming traffic. My date didn't look at me again until she was giving the police her statement. By the time the cops had quit asking me questions about what I said to the woman in red and decided I wasn't involved in her death, my date was long gone. That was the last straw. This time I couldn't rationalize away the guilt and shame. This app was evil. There was no more pretending that wasn't the case. Whether there were flesh and blood employees behind it or some sinister presence, I didn't know, but the evil nature of it was undeniable. I went home and deleted the app. I sent Matt a string of texts asking him what he'd gotten me into. I called him several times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I wished my roommates were out of town as I was desperate to talk to someone, anyone, about what had happened. Instead, I could only smoke and drink myself into an oblivion as I waited for a reply from Matt, finally falling asleep around 4 a.m. I woke at 9 a.m. to frantic banging on the door. It was Matt, eyes bloodshot with dark crescent moons carved into his lower lids. Before I could lay into him, he had pushed his way inside and started closing the blinds. "I fucked up, man," he said. "I fucking fucked up. I shouldn't have gotten you involved." "No shit, dude. I had to delete the app." "You can delete it." "What?" "It keeps coming back. You have to get rid of your phone. And even then, I'm not sure." I checked my phone and sure enough, it was front and center. I deleted it again and watched it disappear, but when I scrolled to my next screen, it had already reappeared. "What the fuck is this thing, Matt?" He didn't answer, his face catatonic now. That's when I finally noticed he had blood on his shirt. "What happened? Where's that blood from?" He sat on the floor and hugged his knees as he started rocking in place. "I fucked up. I fucking fucked up. They're dead. They're dead. They're dead." He just kept repeating the words over and over like a broken record, making my skin crawl. "Who's dead?" "All of them. Because I wouldn't do it." "Wouldn't do what?" "I couldn't do it. I tried, but I couldn't." "Whatever it is, we'll go to the police and get it straightened out. We'll tell them about the app," I said. "We can go to them. They'll blame me." "For what? Just tell me what happened." "You don't get it," he snapped. "We can't. They're listening. They know what we're doing." "Okay," I said, trying to calm him down. "All right, why don't you take a shower and get cleaned up? Then you can tell me what happened and we'll figure out what to do." Shortly after I got him in the shower, someone knocked on the door. By the time I looked out the window, a delivery truck was driving away. I cracked the door and saw a small box on the front step. I picked it up and shook it. Whatever was inside thudded around. I locked the door behind me and carried the box to the kitchen. "Is someone here?" Matt called from the shower. "Just Amazon. All good." I cut open the box and stared in confusion. Inside was a revolver. My phone buzzed. An alert from Task. My hand shook as I checked it. "Matt's services are no longer needed. Terminate his employment. He'll have 5 minutes to complete the task." A wave of nausea hit me. I thought about calling 911, but I realized Matt might be right. I had no idea what to tell them. There's an evil app that wants me to murder my friend. Good luck with that. I decided to call Rachel. She was the only other person I knew of who was involved with this thing. Maybe she'd have some information or know what to do. I started to ask Matt if he could recall her number when I remembered he'd texted us both when we all went to a party together a few months back. I searched through my texts and found the chat. Rachel picked up almost immediately. "Hello? Rachel?" "He's Matt's friend, Spencer." I kept my voice down and went to my room. Something happened. I don't even know where to start. "Where's Matt?" "He's here, in the shower. I think they want me to..." "Not over the phone. I'm close by. I'll be right over." I hung up and noticed the shower had stopped. I walked back out to the living room to find Matt, still wet but now dressed in the clothes I'd left for him. His back was turned, but I could see the empty box next to him on the floor. "What's the task?" he asked. "Matt, I wasn't going to..." He turned and aimed a gun at me. "I'm serious. I would never just put down the gun and let's talk. Shut the fuck up and let me think." With his free hand, he clutched his head, his face scrunching up as he held back a sob. He took a deep breath and let it out. "I'm sorry, man." He gripped the gun tighter, his finger moved to the trigger. The car door slammed outside and got his attention. He hesitated as he turned to look. I jumped in his direction and tackled him. The gun skidded across the floor. He thrashed at me as I held him down. "Stop," I said. I'm not trying to hurt you." The fight went out of him and he quit struggling. "I'm going to stand up now," I told him. "Are you going to be calm?" He nodded. I stood and moved to the window, peering through the blinds to see Rachel walking up the front steps. "It's just Rachel," I told him. "The three of us are going to figure this out together, okay?" Matt didn't say anything, but he sat up. I unlocked the door and had it halfway open when a sickening realization hit me. Rachel had never been to my place before, and I didn't give her my address. I was already slamming the door when she raised her own gun and fired. Relief washed over me as I realized she'd missed. I dropped to the floor, reached up, and deadbolted the door. I turned around and pressed my back against the wall. But from this angle, I could see that she hadn't missed after all. Matt's lifeless eyes stared at me from the carpet, blood pooling around the hole in his head. Steady, methodical thumping came from the door, the sound of Rachel kicking at it. I scrambled to grab the revolver from where it had skidded across the floor when I tackled Matt. I aimed it at the door and yelled out, "Please don't make me shoot you, Rachel. Just leave." "I can't," she called back, her voice cracking. "They have my sister. I gave them." I told her. She couldn't finish the sentence. Bullets peppered the door around the lock. She kicked it again, the frame splintering. I pulled the trigger, hoping a warning shot would scare her off. Click. Nothing. I pulled the trigger again. Click. Nothing. They'd sent me an unloaded gun, a twisted test that had apparently failed. I ran to the garage and climbed in my car. I had no idea where Rachel was, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I pushed the garage door button. The door hummed as it rose slowly. Rachel's boots appeared just outside. I didn't hesitate. I turned the ignition and shifted into drive. I slammed on the gas, bursting through the door and catching Rachel off guard. Her upper body slammed into the hood of the car even as she fired the gun at me through the windshield. Unable to see with bits of garage door blocking my view, I swerved across the lawn and plowed into the mailbox, sandwiching Rachel's body against it. Tears burned my eyes as I climbed out of the car and crawled towards Rachel's body. Neighbors had emerged from their homes. If they'd been disturbed by the gunshots, they'd hidden behind closed doors. Now that the threat seemed neutralized, they exited to witness the gruesome aftermath. I leaned over Rachel's dying body. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I didn't want to." Her mouth flapped uselessly as she tried to speak. I moved closer to hear what she was saying. "My sister. They said they'd let her quit if I'd please help her." "Who are they?" I asked. But Rachel was gone. I noticed blood dripping onto the lawn near Rachel's arm. I looked down to see I'd caught a bullet in the shoulder. I heard sirens as I passed out next to her body. I awoke in the hospital to find an officer sitting with me. I tried to sit up. "Stay down," she said. "You were hurt pretty bad, but you're gonna be okay. Your parents have been notified, and they're on the way." It wasn't. I had no idea where to begin. "You don't have to say anything. You're not in any trouble. The neighbors' reports made it pretty clear it was self-defense. The two deceased turned out to be some pretty big drug dealers, and you got caught in the crossfire. But you're lucky. Things could have been a lot worse for you." "That's not what happened," I said. She looked at me for a while, taking me in. Then she said, "You're not thinking straight. Get some rest and we can chat later if you still want to." The cop stood up and walked out of the room. I noticed a phone on the table between my bed and the chair she'd been sitting in. "Hey, you left your phone," I called out. She turned back and shook her head as she held up a cell. "Mine's right here. I'm pretty sure that's yours." The phone buzzed on the table, giving me instant chills. A single notification lit up the screen. "You have a new task." The Carrigan bloodline has kept something locked up for generations. My sister is the last true Carrigan. It started when my mother died. The unknown number introduced themselves as Harold Tawney from Tawney & Sons, a local funeral parlor just south of Saltpenny. He delivered the news like I already knew it. Courteous, flat, like a weatherman reporting on some distant tornado that had torn through someone else's town, left behind somebody else's wreckage. She had been dead a while, he told me, left sitting around in the open Louisiana heat long enough that he was quick to suggest a closed casket service. I told him that wouldn't be necessary, that I'd probably just get her cremated. And besides, who the hell in Saltpenny would be seen dead paying their respects at the casket side of Bonnie Ann Carrigan? A beat of silence on the line. Tactful, respectful, but just long enough to tell me he secretly agreed. "Well then," he puffed, sighing like this was his burden to share. I'd get on down here right quick. Then, get things settled for the rains come. There was a careful clearing of his throat. A Boleyn's still here. Might be you gotta find her a new living situation. Now her mask on. Jesus, I muttered, ignoring Harold Tawny's little inhale of Christian indignation at the phrase. She's still there. I hadn't thought about my sister in years. Truth be told, she was easy to forget. What I remembered was mostly just her slumped in that rickety wheelchair, positioned so she could stare through that drafty circular window overlooking Hangman's Creek. Mama used to say she liked counting the rabbits that pushed through the undergrowth, but I don't know if I believe that. The night I left for good, kicking and screaming, clawing at the doorframe while CPS pried my little fingers from the splintering wood, I remember calling her name. Abi, Abi, like my fractured, ghost-eyed sister would somehow find herself and come to my aid. But there was enough lingering loyalty pulsing through my veins that I took a couple of weeks off work, packed the sedan, and set out for Salt Penny. It took 3 solid days of driving, and each mile closer to my destination sent goose pimples dancing across my skin. When I finally saw that familiar battered sign "Welcome to Salt Penny," I had to pull over, put my head between my knees, and focus on my breathing. Even the smell was the same. It slipped through the half-cracked windows, keeled over nature left to rot, asphalt warmed by too many summers, petrified core rising up from thirsty earth. Beneath it all, the faint, briny tang of the saline where the water tangled itself into the mangroves, dragging the salt deep into the roots. Salt Penny was more bones than body now, a worn-down main street lined with dusty display windows, their glass streaked with years of neglect. Faded yellow signs still clung to the doors. Closing down sale. Everything must go, but everything had already been gone a long time. I stopped at a gas station to top up and buy some snacks. It's a testament to how frozen in time this shithole is, because the eyes that followed me, this outsider with bare shoulders and a tattoo snaking up her neck, knew me by name. Never mind that the last time anybody laid eyes on me, I was hollering and bucking in the back of a police cruiser almost 25 years ago. That's Bonnie Ann Carrigan's kid, all right? They didn't have to say it out loud. Their eyes did the talking. Dust shot and narrowed. They dragged over me like a slow-moving tide and found me wanting. The apple don't fall far. I didn't linger. When I pulled up outside the house, the place looked exactly as I left it, down to the last peeling curl of paint, the same wasp nest fattening under the eaves. The house sat slumped on its stilts, the wood warped from years of bayou rot, leaning into the shade of a broad-armed cypress whose roots ran gnarled and deep into the black water of Hangman's Creek. It should've collapsed by now, should've sunk into the mud, and been swallowed whole. I stepped through the creaky front door, letting out a breath like I'd been punched in the gut. The air inside was thick with time, a snapshot frozen in place. The place was worn, but clean, smelled of Lysol and mothballs. On the dining table, a calling card sat untouched. Louisiana State Social Services. So Abilene hadn't been completely abandoned. Then, the stairs groaned beneath my weight as I climbed. The hallway upstairs seemed longer now, as though it had stretched itself to accommodate the weight of everything that had happened since I left. I turned into the first room on the left. There she was. Abilene was by the window. She was older than I remembered, of course. What had once been a frail young woman was now a frail old woman. She looked up when she heard me. Her wrinkled face broke into a toothy smile. "Hello, Blythe," she said, her voice reedy and deep south. "Hello, Blythe. You've come back to us." She held out tremulous arms. I sunk to my knees and let her wrap them around me, stick-thin and sweet-smelling. This wasn't the silent, distant girl of my memories. This was my older sister, not quite all there. Never much one for words, but doing her best to show she loved me, drawing me childlike stick figures, portraying us holding hands, or smiling guilelessly as I read to her aloud a story she couldn't follow, or clapping her hands together as I paraded through the room in one of Mama's dresses. And suddenly I hated myself. I had reduced her to a shadow, a gormless, wordless memory in my mind, a mechanism to distance myself when I found myself halfway across the state, with no way of returning, and soon no desire to. It was easier to say goodbye if I'd altered the past so there was nothing to miss. I exchanged light-hearted words with a heavy heart and told her I was happy to be back. After Abilene settled back into her routine, eyes glazed over with contentment, humming some half-forgotten tune, I excused myself to go set up my bedroom. The floorboards whined beneath my feet as I made my way to my old room, the one at the far end of the hall, tucked beneath the sloping eaves where the roof came down at a sharp angle. The door stuck, swollen from humidity, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. It was smaller than I remembered, much smaller. I dumped my duffel on the bed and started unpacking what little I'd brought when something caught my eye. On the wall beside the closet door, pencil marks, dozens of them, climbing up the yellowed wallpaper. Each mark had a date beside it, and my name, my height measurements, going back to when I was barely tall enough to reach the doorknob. September 14th, 1992, Blythe, 34. December 25th, 1992, Blythe, 35. Christmas growth spurt. August 30th, 1993, Blythe, 36 and a half. My fingers traced the marks, climbing higher. Mama's handwriting, loopy and childlike, the kind that never quite matures past a certain point, the kind that spoke to her own stunted development. She hadn't been a bad mom. I had memories of her coming home late, sometimes with a split lip or purple eye, but always with a little treat tucked in her purse. Look what I found for my special girl, She'd say, like Shed discovered these treasures on the side of the road, rather than purchase them with what little money she had. She never brought her work home. No matter how desperate things got, and they got desperate plenty, she never turned our house into an extension of whatever motel room or car backseat she was using that night. Home was for us, her girls, her treasures. Later, I found Abilene's medical records in a neat folder on Mama's bedside table. The records confirmed what I'd always known but never wanted to face. Mama Bonnie Ann Carrigan was herself the product of a relationship between a father and daughter, and Abilene's father, listed only as Joseph C. on her birth certificate, was almost certainly Joseph Carrigan, Mama's biological brother, who died of liver failure shortly after Abilene was born. This wasn't news, of course, just a hell of an ugly thing to see in the light of day. My own lineage was less tangled. Thank the Lord for rich old perverts. I was born much later when Mama was already in her 40s. My birth had caused a scandal because it was widely rumored that I was the product of her long-standing arrangement with Theodore Hollis, the town's most prominent attorney. Theodore had denied it, of course, but I'd seen the way he looked at me the few times I'd encountered him in town as a child, a mixture of guilt and naked fear that told me everything I needed to know. I closed the folder and put it back where I'd found it. Through the thin walls I could hear Abilene humming to herself, the same tuneless melody she'd been humming since I arrived. It should have been comforting, that childlike contentment. Instead, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The sound triggered something in me, a memory so deeply buried I wasn't sure if it was real or just some nightmare my child's mind had conjured to make sense of things. I was 4, maybe 5. Mama dragging me down the basement stairs, her grip on my wrist tight enough to leave finger-shaped bruises, her voice high and desperate. "You have to see it, Blythe. You have to. You're Carrigan.
It's in your blood."
The basement door, a strange symbol carved into the wood, worn smooth from years of tracing fingers. "Can you sense it?" Shed asked, her eyes fever bright. "Can you feel it watching you?" I couldn't. I never could, and that would send her into a frenzy of disappointments. "You're not trying hard enough," Shed say, pushing me through the doorway. "Maybe you need more time with it. Maybe you need to be alone." Then darkness. The door locked behind me. Hours in the pitch black, my imagination populating the shadows with horrors. I'd scream until my throat was raw, pound on the door until my fists ached. Eventually Shed opened it, her face expectant. "What did you see? Tell me what you saw." I'd lie, making up monsters, hoping one of my inventions would tick some specific box Shed engineered in her broken mind. But she always knew when I was making it up, and her face would crumple, not with anger, but with a desperate kind of fear. "What are we gonna do when Abby dies?" Shed whisper, more to herself than to me. "What are we to do when there ain't none of us left?" I found myself moving through the house, drawn toward the kitchen and the door I knew led to the basement. The door was exactly as I remembered it, heavy, imposing, with that strange symbol carved into its surface. The knob turned easily in my hand. No lock, no resistance, just a dark stairwell leading down into shadow. I flicked the wall switch, but nothing happened. I took my phone out, turned on the flashlight, and began my descent. The stairs creaked beneath my weight. At the bottom, I fumbled until my fingers found a cord dangling from the ceiling. I pulled it, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, casting yellow light over the basement. Behold, the pit of unimaginable horrors. Or rather, just a basement. Concrete floor, cinder block walls, derelict washing machine, moldy corners. I laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. What had I expected? Some Lovecraftian horror lurking in the shadows. From upstairs came a noise that froze my blood. Abilene screaming. "Boleth! Boleth!" Her voice came garbled and thick, like she was talking through pudding. "Dad! Dad! Get out of there!" I rushed back to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. At the top, Abilene blocked the doorway, her wheelchair wedged tight, her head jerking in that repeated sideways twitch she got when she was agitated. It. She jabbed a crooked finger down the stairs. "Behind you. Bide. You see. I glanced back down the stairs. Empty. Nothing but shadows. And that single, swinging bulb. Abilene. There's nothing there. Just an empty. Do not go down. She flapped her hands frantically, a high keening sound escaping her throat. Bad thing will get you. Her head snapped to the side 3 times in rapid succession, that tick of hers worsening with her panic. I pushed past her, back into the kitchen, then turned to help maneuver her wheelchair away from the door. Her whole body was trembling, one leg bouncing uncontrollably against the footrest. "Abilene, listen to me. There's nothing in the basement. I was just down there." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "Gotta keep it locked up, or the monster." Okay. I held up my hands in surrender, holding her agitated gaze, nodding long and slow until she began to copy me. "I understand. I'm sorry. I won't go down there again. Kay." It took nearly an hour to calm her down enough to take her medication and help her into bed. By the time I finally collapsed into my own, exhaustion had seeped into my bones. I stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance across the popcorn texture, just the branches outside my window, stirred by the night breeze. Nothing more. Mama had clearly passed her delusions on to Abilene. That was all this was. 2 damaged women, products of generations of inbreeding and isolation, spinning ghost stories to make sense of their broken minds. And now here I was, letting their madness seep into me, feeling my skin crawl every time the house settled or the wind picked up. I turned on my side, pulling the musty quilt tighter around me. Sleep? I just needed sleep. In the morning, I call a real estate agent. Get the ball rolling. 2 weeks max. And I'd be back in Jefferson City with Abilene safely settled somewhere with professional care. Just as I was drifting off, something scratched at my window. Just a branch, I told myself. It came again. 3 distinct taps. My eyes flew open. The window was empty, nothing but darkness beyond the glass. But as I watched, breath caught in my throat. A dark liquid began to seep through the seam where the window met its frame. It oozed slowly, viscous and black in the moonlight, defying gravity as it crawled horizontally across the glass. I blinked hard and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, just my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. From somewhere deep in the house came a sound like laughter, not human laughter, but something wet and gurgling, like someone drowning in their own amusement. Just the pipes, I told myself. Just the old plumbing groaning. I pressed my pillow over my ears, but the laughter seemed to slip through, to find its way inside my head where it took root and began to grow. And underneath it all, so faint, I could almost convince myself I wasn't hearing it, came the rhythmic thumping from the basement, like a heart beating beneath the floorboards, like something trying to get out. Morning capped off a sleepless night, dragging itself over the horizon in smears of pink and orange. Daylight brought clarity. Fuck this house. Fuck this place. I needed to get Abilene out of here. I made us both breakfast. Abilene ate mechanically, her eyes darting constantly toward the basement door. I pretended not to notice. "I'm heading into town today," I told her, rinsing our plates in the sink. "You gonna be okay?" "Okay," she parroted, a piece of curdled egg white dropping from her fork and hitting the table. "You will come back." "Of course." I say so fast and hard it comes across as almost aggressive. "Of course I will. I'm not going anywhere ever again." "Okay," she repeats, happily this time. The real estate office was sandwiched between a boarded-up hardware store and a pawn shop. The bell over the door jangled as I stepped inside. A young woman looked up from behind a cluttered desk, her face brightening with a smile that seemed genuine, if a bit over-eager. "Hi, welcome to Saltpenny Realty. Can I help?" She was maybe 30, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and clothing that looked surprisingly metropolitan. "I'm looking to list a property," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk, the Carrigan place. Her eyes widened just a fraction. "You're Blythe Carrigan." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "I thought you might be." She stuck out her hand. "Lorelei Tanner." Well, it was Lorelei Carrigan before I got married, but that didn't stick, and neither did the husband. She gave a braying laugh. "We're third cousins or something. You know that. My daddy was your granddaddy's nephew, or cousin, I think." "I didn't know I had family in town," I said, surprised. "Besides Abilene, I mean." "Oh, honey, you've got Carrigans stretched all over this county. Most of them changed their names or moved away, but were around." "Right. Well, about the house." "Oh," her eyes lit up. "The Carrigan house. I've been dying to get a look inside that place. It's got quite the history." This surprised me. "It does?" Lorelei laughed again. "Honey, that house is practically Salt Penny's own little house of Usher. I'm something of an amateur historian. I've been researching it for years." My curiosity was piqued despite myself. "What kind of history?" She glanced at her watch. "Tell you what, my lunch break's in half an hour. Why don't you meet me at the library archives? I can show you what I found." The Salt Penny Public Library was a squat brick building that had once been the town's post office. Inside it smelled of mildew and furniture polish, the competing scents creating a uniquely institutional funk. Lorelei was waiting for me in the back room, where plastic filing cabinets held what passed for the town's archives, mostly old newspapers, church records, and the occasional handwritten journal donated by one of Salt Penny's founding families. "Here we go," she said, spreading a collection of yellowed papers across a scarred wooden table. "The real story of the Carrigan house," which by the way wasn't always the Carrigan house. "Yeah?" "It was built by the Holloway sisters back in 1789. She pointed to a faded sketch of three women standing in front of a house that, despite the crude rendering, was recognizably my childhood home. Agatha, Beatrice, and Constance Holloway, unmarried sisters who came down from Massachusetts. I leaned closer, studying the sketch. The women looked ordinary enough, severe expressions typical of portraits from that era, high-neck dresses, hair pulled back tight. They were healers, Lorelei continued. Pretty common back then, but they were also outsiders. Educated, independent women living alone, which didn't sit right with the God-fearing folk of Salt Penny. Let me guess, I said, already seeing where this was heading. Someone got sick, the herbs didn't work, and suddenly they're witches. Close. Lorelei slid a brittle newspaper clipping toward me. The youngest Holloway sister, Constance, was courted by a local preacher, Jonathan Carrigan. That's right, your great-great-something granddaddy. By all accounts, she spurned his advances rather publicly. Shortly after, Carrigan's wife fell ill with a wasting disease. He blamed Constance, claimed she'd hexed his wife out of jealousy. I skimmed the article which described in lurid detail the witch hunt that followed. Jonathan Carrigan, leading a mob of townsmen, stormed the Holloway house on a November night in 1790, where they found damning evidence. A grimoire, I muttered. So the story goes. Lorelei nodded. It was enough to convince the town that the Holloway sisters had summoned some kind of cloven-hoofed no-good. They were dragged from their home and drowned in Hangman's Creek, right behind the house. My stomach turned at the image of three women being held under the murky waters of the creek I'd played beside as a child. And then what? Carrigan just took their house? That's where it gets interesting, Lorelei continued. Jonathan Carrigan was a respected man in the community, father of 5, deacon at the church, all that. But after the drownings, something changed in him. He abandoned his family, moved into the Holloway house, and started living with his much younger sister, Eleanor. Jesus, I breathed. Incest was the least of the rumors. She passed me a fragile, leather-bound book. This is a journal kept by Jonathan's eldest son, Thomas. It was donated to the library in the 1950s by a Carrigan descendant who was trying to distance himself from the family reputation. I opened it carefully, the brittle pages threatening to crumble beneath my fingers. The handwriting was spidery and faint, but still legible. Father hath wholly taken leave of his senses. He no longer attendeth the church, though he was once its most devoted servant. Instead, he passeth his days and nights in the cellar of that accursed Holloway house, muttering incantations which we children were once forbidden, even in jest, to whisper. When I did confront him about his forsaking of mother and his sinful dealings with Aunt Eleanor, he did claim it necessary to keep the blood strong for that which must come after. He speaketh of a pact made, a duty that shall be passed unto his children, and his children's children, unto eternity. Lorelei was watching me, gauging my reaction. There's more. Skip ahead a few pages. I turned the delicate pages until I found an underlined passage. Father did appear at church this day for the first time in many months, his clothing in disarray and reeking of decay. In the midst of Reverend Porter's sermon, Father did begin to wail and rend his garments, crying out that he had unleashed a great evil when he did drown the Holloway women. He did claim that in the use of their unholy grimoire he had bound himself and his bloodline forevermore to keep some nameless horror confined. The congregation was sorely disturbed, and several ladies did faint at his ravings. He was removed bodily from the church, all the while screaming, "So long as a Carrigan of strong Carrigan blood standeth as keeper, the evil shall not escape its prison." I set the journal down, a chill working its way up my spine. After that, the Carrigans became increasingly isolated, Lorelei said, her voice softer now. Generation after generation, they kept to themselves, intermarrying with cousins or closer to keep the bloodline pure. I thought of my mother's desperation to have children, her parade of men, and her devastation at each miscarriage. I remembered her inexplicable grief when her brother Joseph died, not the grief of someone mourning a loved one. By all accounts, he was an abusive man, but the panic of someone who's lost their only ally against something terrible. She was trying to keep the bloodline going, I murmured, more to myself than to Lorelei. All those pregnancies, all those men. Your mama had quite the reputation, Lorelei said carefully. But I always wondered if there wasn't more to it. And then there was me, I said. Her miracle baby, except I wasn't a pure Carrigan. I thought of my childhood tests in the basement, Mama trying desperately to see if I could sense whatever it was she believed lived down there, her growing despair when I couldn't. She gave up on me, I said softly. That's why she let CPS take me without a fight. I wasn't useful to her. It was an uncharitable summary of my surrender, and I knew it. It hadn't felt like I was simply a tool shed, decided to donate. I still remember her drawn face, lit up with blue light as she clasped her hands together so tight they bled white as if trying to resist reaching for me, even as I reached desperately for her. Somehow I knew she'd done it for my own good. And Abilene, I heard Lorelei ask as though from a distance. Joseph, my uncle's daughter. Her last hope for a pure Carrigan. The pieces were falling into place. A twisted logic emerging from what I'd always dismissed as madness. But Abilene's disabled. Mama must have been terrified that she'd die without anyone to, what? Keep up the family tradition of basement-dwelling crazy. Lorelei began gathering the papers and journals, sliding them carefully back into their folders. Well, it's like I said, just an interesting bit of local history. Thanks for showing me this, I said, standing up. It explains a lot about my childhood. Happy to help. She pulled a business card from her pocket. Give me a call when you're ready to list the house. I drove back through town in a daze, my mind churning with images of drowned women and raving preachers and generations of Carrigans huddled in that creaking house, guarding something they couldn't name but couldn't escape. I didn't go straight into the house when I got back. Instead, I stumbled my way down the riverbed to the cool surface of Hangman's Creek, some morbid curiosity driving me forward. The afternoon sun was sinking fast, painting the water a sickly amber that caught on the ripples and flashed like warning signals. The creek wasn't much to look at, just a sluggish body of brown water choked with duckweed. I stared into the murky water, trying to imagine three women being forced beneath its surface, their skirts billowing around them like blooming flowers, their hands clawing at their captors, their screams cut short by the rush of filthy water into their lungs. I was so preoccupied by these grisly images flashing through my mind that I didn't notice at first. The surface of the creek began to ripple, though there was no wind. The ripples grew, concentric circles spreading outward from three distinct points, as if someone were dropping stones into the water, except the disturbances were coming from below, pushing upward. I should have run. Any sane person would have. But I stood frozen, watching as three dark shapes began to rise from the water. Heads first, hair plastered to skulls like rotting seaweed, then shoulders, arms, torsos. Three women in sodden dresses that might once have been white but were now the mottled gray-green of cemetery lichens. Their skin had the bleached, bloated look of things too long underwater, their eyes clouded over like those of dead fish. They moved toward the bank with a terrible synchronicity, water streaming from their clothes, their hair, their open mouths, and they were speaking, no chanting, in voices that sounded like water gurgling down a drain. By water taken, by water bound. What's lost beneath shall soon be found. When last blood falls, the chain shall break, and what lies sleeping shall awake. I screamed then, scrambling backwards up the bank, my feet slipping on the muddy incline. I fell, hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. When I looked up again, the creek was empty, just water and shadows, and the first fireflies of evening dancing across the river's gleaming surface. My heart hammered against my ribs as I staggered to my feet and ran for the house, not looking back. Inside, my hands shook so badly I could barely dial Lorelai's number. When she answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I want to list the house, today now. After assurances that I was okay, no really, I'm fine. She agreed on a dirt cheap price, and I hung up, expecting a contract in my mailbox the following morning. I leaned against the wall, willing my breathing to slow. I was letting this place get to me. The stories, the isolation, the weight of family history, it was all playing tricks on my perception. I went through the motions of making dinner for Abilene and myself, though my appetite had vanished. She watched me from her wheelchair as I set the table, her eyes tracking my every movement. Are you okay? She ventured quietly. Is Blythe okay? I set the plates down harder than I intended, just tired. Did you visit the water? My hand froze halfway to the silverware drawer. How did you know that? Abelin's head tilted to one side, an eerily bird-like gesture, muddy shoes. I just went for a walk, that's all. Did you see the dead girls? A chill ran through me. What are you talking about? The dead girls, she repeated. I like them. Sometimes they play with me. I sank into a chair and pushed my plate away, my stomach churning. Listen, Abilene, I called the real estate agent today. I'm listing the house for sale. For a moment, she stared at me blankly, as if the words didn't compute. Then her face crumpled, features collapsing in on themselves like a building being demolished. No, the scream that tore from her was primal, animal. You can't sell it. You will kill us all. She lunged from her wheelchair with a strength I wouldn't have thought possible, her frail body propelled by sheer desperation. Her hands found my face, clawing, not to hurt but to silence, her palm pressing hard against my mouth. Abi, stop. Get off of me. It'll hear you. It'll know, she wailed, wild-eyed. It'll know you want to go. I shoved her away, harder than I meant to. She fell awkwardly, her weak legs buckling beneath her. There was a crack as her head connected with the edge of the table, and she slumped to the floor. A low, keening wail rose from her throat, and I realized with horror that she'd wet herself. Abilene, I'm sorry, I whispered, horrified, kneeling beside her. I didn't mean to, let me help. Getting her upstairs was a struggle, her body alternately rigid with fear and limp with defeat. I ran her a bath, murmuring soft apologies she didn't seem to hear. Her eyes had gone vacant, but occasionally her lips would move, forming words I couldn't quite catch. I tucked her into bed, half expecting her to fight me, but she went docilely enough, curling into a fatal position beneath the quilt. It knows, she whispered as I turned to leave. It's so happy now. It's been waiting such a long time. I shut her door and retreated to my own room, double-checking that the window was locked, drawing the curtains tight. I changed into pajamas, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling, telling myself over and over that everything would be fine. In the morning, I'd sign the listing agreement. In a few weeks, the house would be sold. Abilene would adjust to her new home. We'd both move on, leaving Saltpenny and its ghost behind for good. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke to darkness and the sound of something scraping against the floor downstairs. A long, dragging noise, like furniture being moved, or something heavy being pulled across hardwood. I lay perfectly still, listening. The scraping stopped, replaced by a wet, slithering sound, then silence. It's nothing, I told myself. Old houses make noises. They settle. They creak. Something thumped directly beneath my bed. Once, twice, 3 times, like knuckles rapping on the underside of the floorboards. I switched on the bedside lamp, but it didn't work. The power must have gone out. I fumbled for my phone, hit the flashlight function with trembling fingers. The beam cut through the darkness, but somehow the shadows it created seemed deeper, more substantial than the ones it dispelled. Another thump, this time from inside the closet. The door, which I was certain had closed before bed, now stood ajar, a slice of deeper darkness visible through the gap. This isn't real, I whispered. This is not happening. As if in answer, every door in the house slammed shut at once, a percussive blast that shook the walls and sent dust raining from the ceiling. From Abeline's room came a thin, terrified wail. I was on my feet before I could think, stumbling toward her room, my phone's light carving a frantic path before me. The air felt thick, resistant, as if I were trying to run underwater, and it was cold. A bone-deep, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the Louisiana night, and everything to do with the wrongness spreading through the house like ink through water. I reached Abeline's door and found it locked. Not stuck, locked, from the inside. "Abeline," I pounded on the wood. "Abeline, open up." Her wailing increased an octave, but otherwise she did not answer. From below came a sound like splintering wood, the basement door being torn from its hinges. Then heavy, wet footsteps on the stairs. Something brushed against my ankle, soft, like the tentative touch of fingertips. I jerked away, swinging my phone's light down to the floor. Nothing there. But the touch came again, this time on the back of my neck. I ran down the hall, down the stairs, blind panic driving me forward. But at the bottom of the stairs, my light caught on the front door, or where the front door should have been. Instead, there was only a solid wall, as if the door had never existed at all. I spun around looking for another exit, but every window, every door had been swallowed by unblemished walls. The house had sealed itself, trapping me inside. And there, across the living room, stood the basement door, wide open and in pieces. Beyond lay only darkness. A darkness so complete, it seemed to have substance, to be reaching out toward me with eager fingers of shadow. Something moved in that darkness. I couldn't see it, not exactly, but I could sense it. A shifting of the air, a redistribution of weight, a presence uncoiling itself after too long confined. And it was happy. I felt its glee like a physical force, a sickly wave of emotion that wasn't mine washing over me. It was delighted, ecstatic. After centuries of being bound, being watched, being kept at bay by generation after generation of Carrigans, it was about to be free. The house was going to be sold. The bloodline was ending. The covenant was breaking. It was celebrating. "This isn't real," I said again, but my voice was a tiny, fragile thing in the vastness of what was happening. "You're not real." The darkness laughed, a sound like meat being torn from bone, like insects burrowing under skin. It wasn't made of sound at all, but of sensation, of violation, of the absolute certainty that something was wrong, fundamentally and irrevocably wrong with the universe. And then it was moving toward me, flowing out of the basement like oil. I couldn't see its shape, but I felt it surround me, brush against me, almost curious, exploratory, learning the contours of my fear. It spoke, not in words but in images, in sensations, flashes of what it planned to do once it was free. Cities burning, the sky split open like a wound, and always pleasure. Its pleasure at our pain, its delight in our terror, its ecstasy at finally being unleashed. I was screaming. I realized distantly, screaming and screaming as it pulled me toward the basement, toward the darkness where it had been imprisoned for so long. My ribs hit each stair as I was dragged down them, fingernails scratching desperately at their frayed surfaces, failing to find purchase. And then light. A harsh, blinding light from the top of the stairs, and Abeline's voice, stronger than I'd ever heard it, "Leave her alone." The thing recoiled. Abeline stood at the top of the basement stairs, her frail body silhouetted against the glow emanating from her outstretched hand. Blood dripped from her palm, where shed cut a deep, straight line across her lifeline. The blood wasn't falling but rising, defying gravity to form a shimmering crimson barrier between us and the thing in the darkness. "Get back," she screamed, spittle flying. "Get back. Carrigan demands it." The darkness screamed. It thrashed against the barrier of Abeline's blood but couldn't break through. It released its hold on me. I scrambled up the stairs, feeling its rage beating against my back like physical blows. Abeline grabbed my arm with her unbloodied hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and together we slammed the basement door shut behind us. She pressed her bleeding palm against the splintered wood, drawing a symbol I recognized from the basement door of my childhood, the same one I'd seen in the Historical Society's archives, carved into the original foundation of the house. The wood beneath her hand rippled, reformed, and became whole again. The symbol blazed briefly, then faded to a dull, rust-colored stain that could have been decades old. From behind the door came a howl of furious frustration, the sound of something that had been inches from freedom being denied once again. The whole house shook with its rage, plaster cracking, light bulb shattering, furniture toppling. Then gradually the noise subsided, replaced by a low, constant scratching, waiting, biding its time. Aboline slumped against the wall, suddenly looking every one of her years and more. We stared at each other in the aftermath, me wild-eyed and shaking, her pale but composed with the dignified exhaustion of someone who had done this many times before. "I felt it," I said finally, my voice raw from screaming. "For the first time, I actually felt it. Mama said it's getting stronger," she said simply, "'cause I'm getting weaker." I nodded, unable to deny it. Whatever skepticism I clung to had been stripped away, leaving only the bare, terrible truth. There was something in the basement, something old, something evil, something kept at bay only by the vigilance of generations of indentured Carrigans, even the broken ones, even the mad ones, even the ones like my mother who sacrificed everything to keep the bloodline going. And now there were only two of us left, me with my diluted blood that barely registered to the thing below, and Aboline frail and aging, the last pure Carrigan. That was 3 years ago. I'm writing this now from the same bedroom I slept in as a child, in the house I swore I'd sell but never did. Aboline is sleeping down the hall, her breathing more labored these days, her episodes of lucidity growing fewer and further between. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less. Her body is finally shutting down after years of fighting against its own genetic destiny. When she's gone, I'll be the only one left, the only one who knows what lives beneath the house, the only one who can hear it scratching at the basement door each night, testing for weaknesses, sensing that its centuries-long imprisonment is nearly over. Because I can't hold it. Not really. Oh, I've tried. Drawing the symbol in my blood, reciting the words Aboline taught me. But it knows. I'm not a true Carrigan. It knows my blood is weak, mixed, impure. It tolerates my attempts to contain it because it finds them amusing, because it knows they're temporary. I thought about burning the house down, but Aboline says that would only free it sooner. The binding isn't to the house, but to the bloodline. The house is just where the original pact was made, where the grimoire was used, where Jonathan Carrigan paid the price for his lust and pledged his descendants in perpetuity. I thought about having a child, finding a distant Carrigan cousin, trying to strengthen the bloodline, continuing the cycle for another generation, but I can't bring myself to do it. Can't condemn another soul to this inheritance of madness and obligation and fear. So I wait, and I watch over Aboline, and I listen to the thing in the basement growing more excited, more eager, more certain of its coming freedom with each passing day. And I wonder what will happen when the last drop of Carrigan blood is gone, when there's no one left to stand between it and the world outside. I think of the Holloway sisters sometimes, those ghostly women rising from the creek. Was it warning or welcome they offered me? When last blood falls, the chain shall break, and what lies sleeping shall awake. I guess we'll all find out soon enough. There's a man who stands across the street from my house every night. I know how this sounds. I know how I sound. You probably think I'm another paranoid insomniac spiraling into delusion from lack of sleep. I wouldn't blame you. A few weeks ago, I would said the same about someone like me. But that was a few weeks ago. There's a man who stands across the street from my house every single night at exactly 2:17 a.m. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He just stands there, watching. At first, I thought he was some drunk wandering home too late, or a tweaker looking for unlocked cars. My neighborhood's not bad, but it's not exactly crime-free either. It was easy to dismiss the first night I saw him. I glanced out the front window while grabbing water from the kitchen, saw a figure under the street lamp, and figured he'd be gone by morning. And he was. When I woke up later that morning, he was gone. But the next night, at the same time, 2:17 a.m., he was there again. Same spot, same stiff posture, same unnatural stillness. I stared at him for a long time, waiting for some movement. Shift his weight, scratch his face, light a cigarette, something. Nothing. I turned away to grab my phone and snap a picture, but when I looked back, he was gone. It was weird, yeah, but I still didn't panic. I figured I just missed him walking off. But then it happened again, and again, and again. For 7 nights straight, I woke up, always at 2:17 a.m., like my body knew to see him standing there, under that flickering street lamp, perfectly still, watching my house. Not watching the street, not just loitering, watching me. I decided to take a video. I left my phone recording by the window, angled perfectly to capture the sidewalk. I figured if I could show someone, anyone, they'd obviously believe me. I didn't wake up that night. I watched the footage the next morning. Nothing. No figure, no movement, just the empty street and that old half-burnt-out streetlight buzzing like always. I thought maybe I'd angled the camera wrong, so I tried again the next night. This time I stayed up watching from behind the curtain and hit record as soon as he appeared. I watched the footage again. Still nothing. The man I saw with my own fucking eyes didn't show up on camera. That's when I started asking friends over. If I couldn't catch him on camera, then someone else standing next to me, right here in the room, they'd have to see him too. My buddy Greg came by for a late night beer. I kept it casual, waited till 2:17 a.m. The man appeared. Without taking my eyes off him, I told Greg to look out the window. He came over and stood next to me. I asked if he could see the man standing there across the street. He squinted and said no. I asked if he was sure, keeping my eyes on the man standing right there under the street lamp. Then Greg asked me if I see a man standing there, and he said it in that way that lets you know someone thinks you're nuts. I could have screamed. The guy was standing right there. I described him in detail: tall, lean, wearing a long dark coat, hands at his sides, head tilted just slightly upward like he was staring at the second floor, my bedroom. Greg laughed it off, but I could tell I'd freaked him out. He didn't finish his beer. Haven't heard from him since. Over the next few nights, I tried again with different people, neighbors, co-workers, even my cousin. Same result every time. I could see him. No one else could. I even brought binoculars one night. I don't know why I thought that would help. I guess I wanted to see his face, confirm he was real. But what I saw wasn't a face. It was... I don't know how to describe it. The proportions were all wrong. It was too long, like it had been stretched vertically. The skin was grayish blue and smooth, like wax. No, not eyes, just black pits sunken into his head. As soon as I looked too long, he turned his head, slowly, and looked directly at me. I dropped the binoculars, backed away from the window. I don't even remember going back to bed that night. That's when I called the police. They humored me. They checked the street, drove around, took my statement. I showed them the footage of nothing, told them about the time, the pattern, everything. One officer asked if I was under stress. Another started suggesting mental health resources. I tried not to lose it in front of them. They said there are all kinds of people out that late. That is, it was probably just a someone drunk or on drugs. They left with some, well, keep an eye out line, and I knew they wouldn't be back. The next night I woke up at 2 a.m. and waited. 2:17 a.m. hit, and the man wasn't under the streetlight. I looked down at my watch. Still 2:17. I looked back out and he still wasn't there, under the streetlight. No, he was closer. He stood at the edge of my lawn, halfway between the sidewalk and the street, still staring, still silent, still utterly still. That was the first night I didn't look away. I sat at the window and stared back for an hour, 2. I don't even remember falling asleep, but when I woke up it was morning and he was gone. I checked the lawn, no footprints. Then 2 nights later he was there again, closer, just outside the window, right beneath it, not moving, not even blinking. That's when I started locking everything. Doors, windows, vents. I sealed my bedroom window with fucking duct tape. I bought a security system, set up cameras around the house, got a baseball bat and a big-ass kitchen knife and kept them both by my bed. That was the first night I heard footsteps in the hallway. I live alone. That thought hit me like ice in my spine. I sat up in bed, clutching the knife in one hand, the bat in the other, heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, not heavy, not shuffling, just soft, steady, confident. They moved past my bedroom door and into the kitchen, then silence. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't get up and check to see who was there or what it was. I didn't even move. I just sat in bed frozen, waiting, listening, hoping. When the sun rose, I forced myself to search the house. Every window was locked, every door still sealed, windows still duct taped from the inside. No signs of a break-in, but the kitchen floor had a set of muddy footprints, bare feet, large, too large. That night I didn't set up the cameras. I didn't check the window. I just sat in bed, holding the knife with white knuckles, too afraid to blink. And yet somehow I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up at 2:16 a.m. and my room was ice cold. The man was standing at the foot of my bed, No glass between us, no window, no street lamp. Inside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just watched him, tall and still, pale and eyeless, towering over me in the dark. Then he lunged. A flash of motion, faster than anything that size should be able to move. His hand came down and a jagged, filthy fingernail ripped through my arm, from shoulder to elbow. I screamed finally. I screamed and he hissed. Not a breathy sound. It was low and gurgling, like wet leaves rustling inside a throat. He slashed again, this time across my face, just beneath my right eye. I felt the heat of blood pour down my cheek. And then just like that, he was gone. I sat there panting, bleeding, shaking like a leaf in a storm. The knife was still in my hand, unused. The clock on my nightstand read 2:18 a.m. I cleaned up the wounds. I figured I'd probably need stitches in my arm, probably my face too, but that could wait. Instead, I went back to the police. I showed them my arm, my face. The cuts were deep, angry, and real. The officer barely looked at them before narrowing his eyes and asking if I did it to myself. What? No, fuck you, I said to him. I told him the guy was in my fucking room. But the cop just cut me off, calling me sir like he actually had any respect for me before proceeding to grill me with questions about whether I'm taking any medications or had any thoughts about harming or killing myself. That's when I knew I was fucked. They thought I was losing it. I could see it in their faces. One officer radioed something in, probably trying to get me put on a psych hold. I could feel the room closing in. I don't know how, but somehow I managed to talk my way out of it. I made up some excuse, laughed it off, said it was a cat scratch and I just had a rough week. I told them I appreciated their concern and promised I'd see a therapist. They let me go, but not before one of them leaned in and told me the next time they saw me like that, I'd be sticking around a lot longer. That was 3 nights ago. He hasn't come back. Not under the street lamp. Not on my lawn. Not inside. But that doesn't mean he's gone. I sit by the window every night now. I don't sleep. I don't eat much. I just watch. The streetlight flickers like always. The camera's long since been turned off. There's no point anymore. Every night, at 2:17 a.m., I stare out into the dark and wait. Sometimes I think I see a shadow flicker in the corner of my vision. Sometimes I feel a breath on my neck and turn to find nothing. Sometimes I wake up with that burning sensation in my arm, as if the wound's been touched. Whatever he is, I don't think he's human. I don't think he's bound by doors or windows or even time. He could be waiting. He could be inside me. He could be somewhere just beyond the veil, watching. I don't know when hell show up again, but I know he's not done with me. And next time I'm not sure I'll survive. It wasn't enough to wish for a daughter. I had to beg. There is a certain shop called Fleur in New York City where magical objects can be purchased, rented, stored, or utilized, but only if you have extraordinary means and the right connections. It isn't the sort of place you can simply walk into. Customers can only gain entrance through referral, and all visits are by appointment only. In what you might call nouveau riche. No Vanderbilts or Astors populate my family tree, but I've done well for myself, and in the end, money is money. I manage a few important funds, and many of my clients have powerful ties that go back to the days of New Amsterdam. It was one such client that made an introduction for me at Fleur. There was no email or even a phone call, simply a red envelope that arrived with a white card inside, listing my name, an address in Manhattan, and an 8 p.m. appointment. The calligraphy was elegant and precise. It was August, hot, and the sun was just setting behind the tall buildings to the west. I arrived promptly, as I always do, to find a 3-story building built of brown bricks. 2 Grecian columns bordered a white door a few steps above street level, but the place was otherwise unpretentious, ordinary even. I knocked once, and heard footsteps shuffling slowly toward the door, which soon opened to reveal a woman in her 50s dressed plainly in jeans and a loose-fitting white shirt. "You must be Tara," she said. "Imenji, the proprietress. Please, follow me." I took a step inside, carefully closing the door behind me. Inside, the house was cozy and clean. I'd expected a crowded maze packed with objects. Instead, we passed an ordinary sitting room with threadbare couches, and a kitchen with basic appliances and outdated tile countertops. "It's not what I expected," I said, knowing the words were rude even as they left my mouth. "When I was younger, I was vain," said Ing-ji. She had a bit of a Midwest accent that made me want to discount anything she said. I had plenty of tools at my disposal, and I'd show up at that door glammed up to make men drool and women jealous. In the end, it brought me more trouble than joy. I should have listened to my father. He ran this place for decades before he handed me the keys. He always said it's best to hide in plain sight. Now I see the wisdom in that. For a moment, something in the periphery of my vision flickered, and in Inja's place I glanced a much taller, thinner woman in a glittering evening gown. Her red hair shimmered like it had been woven with strands of tinsel and fell halfway down her back. Black and green tattoos snaked down her arms. The inks moved slowly beneath her skin. As I followed her into an austere office, the flicker went away, and I saw the plain version of her again, smiling at me as if we now shared a secret. "So," she said, "I'm aware of your situation. I sympathize." "Do you have children?" I asked, and she shook her head. "I've never wanted them," she said. "It complicates this line of work. Certain clients see fit to threaten your family's safety if they can get what they want. Things get quite ugly." She said this with an air of someone who'd crossed many dangerous people and come out on top. I thought it best not to inquire further. "I've tried all the normal methods," I said. "Hormones, IUI, IVF. I was trying not to betray any emotion, but I felt my chest constricting. I'd hate myself if I cried in front of this stranger. I just thought if maybe you had some kind of ointment, maybe, or a charm. Jesus, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud." She held out a hand, gesturing for me to do the same. Then she took hold of my wrist and spit in my open palm. I tried to draw it back, but her grip was far stronger than it should have been. She rubbed her thumb in small circles all around my skin until the spit was spread evenly. Then finally, she released me and slowly nodded. "Unfortunately, none of the usual methods will work in your case," she said. "There's something blocking you." "Blocking me?" I tried not to sound too unduly skeptical. "Like a diaphragm?" I wanted to add, but I bit my tongue. "Yes, something powerful that even I can't quite see." Now I rolled my eyes. Of course, my bullshit meter was going into hyperdrive. I could almost sense that sales pitch coming. Of course I had a 1 in a million problem that would require a very expensive solution, right? "Sounds like you can help me then," I said, standing. "No," she said. "You can help yourself, but only if you want it badly enough." I hesitated for a moment. I could always try the IVF again. A new method was being pioneered down at the Mayo Clinic, something to do with treating the ovaries with stem cells maybe, but I could only imagine it ending in utter expensive failure. And then there was the other issue. Marlon, my boyfriend of 8 years, had thrown his hands up at the whole thing, frustrated at my tenacity, which he called obsession. A few days earlier, after our latest fight, he'd stormed out of the apartment without a word and hadn't responded to any of my texts since. "I can help you," she added. I sat down. "I want it more than you could possibly realize," I said. "Many people who show up here believe that," she said. "Some are correct, most aren't." She opened the door and rang a small bell. A few moments later, a thin, red-headed man walked in carrying a roll of fabric over his shoulder. "You don't need a salve to shock your womb into obedience," she said. "You need a wish." "Like from a genie?" I said, almost laughing. "You got Robin Williams' ghost in here?" She smiled thinly, as if humoring a child. "There are such things as beings who can grant boons to humans," she said, "but they don't live in lamps or rings, and they are closer to gods than to that blue monstrosity in Aladdin." She nodded to her companion, who knelt and rolled out the fabric. It was a rug, I realized, or what may have passed for one long ago. The gray fabric was beaten and frayed, and black, blocky images of antelopes had faded into almost nothing. "The rug is from the Ubaid period, roughly 4,800 BCE, explained Inge. "Even were it not charmed, it would be one of a kind, amongst the oldest textiles in existence. By the same token, it's likely that it had survived for so long precisely because of its supernatural qualities." I had to stop myself from making a joke about magic carpets. Inge looked deadly serious now. "In the popular imagination, magical objects are portrayed as easy fixes," said Inge. "A lamp you rub or a sword that slices through stone, a carpet that flies. In reality, most enchanted objects can only be activated through extreme effort and determination. They're merely a foot in the door to seeking supernatural aid. The true effort comes from the seeker." "So how does it work?" I asked. "To contact the being tied to this rug, you must kneel on it for 3 days and nights. During that time, you may not sleep, eat, or drink. If you have proven the strength of your resolve after 3 days, the spirit will visit you in your desire. And I can wish for anything? Most wishes are acceptable, but it's good to know ahead of time that there are limits. You cannot use the wish to kill a living thing or to negate the wish of another. Such things are against the nature of the spirit. It is a generous being by nature, looking to grant the heart's desire of the worthy. My wish is worthy, I said. She nodded. You will need time to prepare, she said. I have a room here that I'll set up for your trial. As I said, you will need to be here for 3 days. Come well nourished and hydrated, just after a full night's sleep. Wear loose, comfortable clothes. She paused. Some clients choose to bring an adult diaper. You've got to be fucking kidding me. I couldn't help but mutter, but she did not smile. The cost is $5 million per day, she said, non-refundable. I raised my eyebrows. I was told money wouldn't be an issue, she said. It's not, I said, regaining my composure. I would have to sell some of my crypto holdings, the easiest asset to liquidate on short notice. I started to assess the tax implications in my head. Good, she said, then we'll set a date. I was able to clear a few days in October for the trial. I told my coworkers I was headed to St. Bart's to do a little beach time. Though I hadn't taken a vacation in years, no one questioned it. If anything, they were glad, telling me it seemed like I could use it. I developed a reputation as highly intense, a ball buster. I think everyone was happy to get a break from me for a few days. I did finally hear from Marlon. He called to let me know he was coming for his things, and that he hoped I wouldn't be there when he arrived. It hurt to lose him, but I told myself I was better off moving forward alone. Perhaps I just didn't want to endure the embarrassment of explaining my visit to Fleur and the trial awaiting me. If anything, Marlon was even more of a skeptic than I was, but he wasn't the kind of person who really truly wanted anything. He'd gone along with the baby plan, partly because of me and partly because it was the thing people did. But I know he never really fantasized about holding a newborn in his arms, taking joy in her little coos and laughs. He was simply along for the ride, until things got too hard, and then he wasn't. It was all for the best. If the wish worked as promised, I wouldn't need Marlon or any man. The baby would be all mine. In the days leading up to the trial, I did everything I could to prepare. I caught up on sleep, ate at a small caloric surplus, and did a daily yoga routine to loosen my joints. Embarrassingly, I also prayed to a small statue of Mary my mother had given me as a girl. It was one of the few objects I'd kept from childhood, and I certainly wasn't Catholic anymore, but it felt like it wouldn't hurt. Finally, the day came. I arrived at Fleur and ascended the steps. The door opened before I could even knock, and Inge gestured for me to enter. She was dressed in a sort of white linen uniform with a tan apron. She might have looked at home in a day spa. Indeed, she handed me a glass of ice water with a cucumber floating inside. It's important to hydrate, and best to empty your bladder before you go in, she said. Then looking me in the eye, she added, Is your resolve as strong now as when we last met? Stronger, I said, honestly, and she nodded. I followed Inge up a winding staircase up to the 3rd level where a narrow, dimly lit hallway opened to an array of doors. As we walked through the hall, it seemed I could hear groans coming from behind several of the doors, strange muttering that sounded like prayer from others. Busy morning, I asked. My client's business is strictly confidential, she said. Should anyone come asking about you, I'd say the same. I wondered if it was all people kneeling on rugs behind every door. Surely not. Behind each door was a different object, a different aspiration. I had heard rumors of others who'd come here for help, a woman in her 50s who lay in a glass coffin that superheated her skin, crisping it like a Thanksgiving turkey's. The pain had been unimaginable, but after 2 hours, when she emerged from the coffin, her skin was as taut as a 20-year-old's. Another friend had been asked to finger paint portrait after portrait of her dead lover in blood, until finally the 44th one began to move of its own volition, and carried out a long and heartfelt conversation that left her happy for the first time in years. Understood, I said. Thank you. We reached a door near the end of the hall. She tapped the handle a few times in a kind of rhythmic sequence, then turned it slowly open. On the other side of the door was a barren room, with no windows. 2 walls were of bare brick. The others were simple white, the paint chipping in places. At the center of the room stood the rug. It looked slightly more important now, set in the middle of the otherwise barren room, like an exhibit at a museum. I was struck by the feeling that I shouldn't touch it. Your trial begins as soon as you place your feet on the rug, said Inge. The spirit will expect you to kneel for the duration of your time here. A bit of stretching from time to time is acceptable, but under no circumstance are you to leave the rug. Should you wish to abandon the trial, simply walk to the door and knock thrice. No negative consequences will befall you, but you will still be expected to pay, and you will not be allowed to attempt the trial again." She paused for a moment. "I should have asked this before," she said. "But as I mentioned, there's some kind of blockage preventing you from having a child. Do you have enemies? Someone who would care enough to curse you?" I tried to think. I'd upset plenty of people in my life, especially at Word. I had ruined certain companies, effectively putting my boot on their necks when they showed the first signs of weakness. I'd sparked selling frenzies that tanked stock prices and ruined small financial empires. An angry tech bro had once pelted me with a milkshake as I left the office. "I don't think any of my enemies believe in this stuff," I said, and she nodded. "Good," she said. "The trial begins now." She walked outside, closing the door behind her, and though I was now the only person in the room, I didn't feel alone at all. The rug had a presence to it, I realized, just not necessarily a human one. Slowly I removed my heels and circled the rug. The floor was frigid against my bare feet, cold enough to be uncomfortable, yet I found it difficult to will myself to step onto the fabric. Finally, I shook my head. I was being stupid. I would get on the rug. I had never shied away from anything simply because it was hard. This time would be no different. The first few minutes were unremarkable. I knelt on the old fabric and stared blankly at the wall. Years of classes, yoga, bara, Pilates, etc. had trained me for this moment. If anything, when I closed my eyes, I could pretend that I was simply holding child's pose for a bit longer than usual, and that I'd soon be hitting the shower and indulging in a green smoothie. As time wore on, it became harder to maintain this fantasy. My muscles began to ache, and I shifted to other sorts of kneeling. Sometimes with my torso elevated, sometimes lying forward and touching the rug with my fingertips. Initially, the rug had seemed to possess no smell, and I imagined it had dissipated over the course of millennia. Now though, with my mind emptied and my senses heightened, I caught notes of odd scents, a kind of burnt one emanating from the black dye and a musky earthen one from the fabric itself. Did they have sheep back in the olden days of the Fertile Crescent, or had this been woven from the hair of some other animal? The pain became worse. My lower back and knees throbbed. How long had I been kneeling now? Surely not more than a few hours. Was I really ready to endure this for days? "I'm going to stand and stretch now," I said, feeling like an idiot. "I hope that's okay. That doesn't break the rules, right?" There was no response, and I felt extra stupid. "Okay?" I asked one last time. Looking up, I seemed to spy a haze of something at the far end of the room near the wall in front of me. An old woman was sitting in a chair, knitting. For a moment she looked up from her work and met my eye, then she slowly nodded, giving me permission. Carefully unbending my knees, I stood. The relief was immediate. The fire that had been burning in my joints went out as if doused with a bucket of water. "This is still the easy part," said the old woman quietly from the far side of the room. "If you don't have the will to continue, better to quit now. There's no prize for quitting halfway, or even at the 3/4 mark. You've never met anyone with a will like mine," I said. She snorted a little and went back to her knitting. "Kneel," she said quietly, and then she disappeared. The pain grew worse, and if it was just pain it might have been easy, but your mind plays tricks on you when you hurt. It'll tell you that you're doing permanent injury to your knees and ankles. It'll ask if the tingling sensation in your toes is nerve damage. Could your spine itself be in jeopardy? Will you still be able to walk at the end of all this? But through all of it, I didn't stop kneeling. Every time an intrusive thought arose, I made myself think of my daughter. At times it was almost as if I could see her. In the vision though, she wasn't a baby, but a woman fully grown, perhaps even my same age. She stood behind the old woman, a hand on her shoulder. She stared at me as if looking for something, perhaps wondering if I'd soon give up, if she'd never come to exist. This wasn't the first time I'd seen my daughter. Since I was a teenager, I've had vivid dreams about her, us at high tea in matching dresses arguing the merits of English breakfast and Earl Grey. Me at her college graduation, my eyes welling with tears as she collects her Princeton diploma. Me popping a bottle of champagne to celebrate her putting the down payment on her first apartment, a little one-bedroom in Brooklyn. It was all so clear that it seemed inevitable, like the dreams were a reality just waiting for me once I reached the proper time. I knew I was destined to become the mom that my own mother never was. Yes, My mother was a disaster. She'd moved to New York from rural Virginia, assuming she'd be discovered by some producer at the cafe where she worked and book her ticket to Broadway. Every morning she spent an hour in the mirror preparing for her big break, but it never came. Instead, there was only an endless procession of men, some with promises of fame and fortune, but mostly just a string of losers that grew increasingly dangerous. I don't like to talk much about that period of my life, except to say that it was terrible and not something I'd wish on anyone. It all ended when I was 12 and came home from school to find her half dead off a bag of gray powder lying on the couch beside her fully dead boyfriend. I went to live with one of her cousins in Brooklyn after that. She had 2 daughters of her own and worked almost constantly. To her credit, I wasn't treated any worse than her biological children, but that's not saying much. At best, we were all seen as burdens, but at least I was safe. I suppose it made me tough and eager to be nothing like my mother. I grew up hating her and had very little contact with her once I stopped living at her place. At some point I heard that she died falling from a balcony, an act that may have been self-inflicted or at the hands of a jealous boyfriend, though the truth was never discovered. I chose not to attend the funeral. I suppose I was driven to be my mother's opposite in every way. Through high school, my grades were perfect, and I never dated. I told myself that when I was older, I would give my daughter the things I never had. A clean apartment looking over the park, and a stable dad who never drank and woke up early each morning to brew coffee and read the news. A mother who loved her above all other things. I looked up at the old woman. My daughter's shade stooped down and whispered something in her ear. "What?" I asked, attempting to bend my head up to look at them. I realized I barely had the strength to do so. How long had I been here now? I had no phone, no watch. The room had no windows. It could have been the first day or the second, certainly not the third. "She says that you could never love her above all other things," the old woman muttered. "You love yourself too much." Had they read my thoughts? "What does she know?" I asked. "She doesn't know me. She's not even real." My daughter crossed her arms and stared daggers. I should mention that not all of my dreams about my daughter had been good ones. There had been nightmares too. Me arriving home to find her 16 and in bed with an older boyfriend. Me screaming and hitting her over and over again, shouting that she'd end up like my mom. And more like this. My daughter coming home with a B+ on a report card, or missing curfew by half an hour as a junior in high school. It always ended with me screaming, reminding her that a single step on the path to failure was one too many. I would wake from these dreams full of anger at her, incredulous that my imagined daughter could betray me in such a way. At some point my right knee gave out. I wasn't sure if the joint had ruptured permanently or if it just needed some rest, but there was physically no way I could make it hold position. I collapsed face first onto the rug and looked up at the old woman as if to ask if this was acceptable. She nodded almost imperceptibly. At some point that I had soiled myself. Not quite sure what to do, I removed the stained pants and underwear and tossed them to the side of the room. Then for whatever reason, I removed my shirt as well, throwing it after the others. I lay curled in a naked ball, looking weakly up at the old woman who kept busy with her knitting. "How long?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Beside her, my daughter never took her eyes off me. She was smirking just a bit, reveling in my pain. She was the bad girl, the one I'd seen in my dreams. She would disobey me. I would come home from work to find her in a cloud of pot smoke, listening to an old Nirvana album, and I would rip the buds from her ears and smash them underfoot over and over again until they were plastic dust. "Give up," she mouthed. "Never," I tried to say, but my lips were chapped and bleeding and the words caught in my throat. I knew then that I would amend my wish. I would wish for a good daughter. Not her. Not the brat looking down at me from the old woman's side. I tried to give voice to these thoughts, to shout them at my daughter, and found I could not. For the first time I felt a pang of true fear. Not that I would give up, but that I would die here, naked on this rug, before I had a chance to make my wish. There had been no promise that I would live. How long could the body go without water? I would have drunk from a gutter or a horse trough were it in front of me. Anything. Shadows were dancing all around the room, a great revel, all ready to carry me off to somewhere dark and permanent. I knew I could make them go away. I could roll off the rug, crawl to the door, beg to be let out, but I would not. I would never, never relent. My daughter shook her head. "See," she said, "shell never bend." The old woman looked up at me and nodded, and I realized that the rug had extended now, growing longer. It reached all the way to the old woman, stretching out to her feet and up her legs, all the way to the needles in her lap that were knitting it longer and longer. She gestured for me to come closer, and I began to crawl, naked and chapped, my right knee fully numb. I dragged myself to her feet. "Tell me what you desire," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "You know," I said, "you need to say it." "A daughter," I said. "My perfect daughter." She thought for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "I cannot help you. The rules are the rules." "What are you talking about?" I choked as I asked the question, my throat dry and painful. "Your wish cannot negate the wish of another," she said softly. "I don't understand," I said. What was she talking about? The woman held up the bits of yarns in her lap. They seemed to vibrate, the dancing threads throwing darkness on the wall like shadow puppets. In these shadows a vision formed. It was my daughter years in the future, my same age. She was here in this very room, kneeling on this very same rug. Time moved in fast motion as I watched her suffer just as I had, her body breaking down, her mind drying into a husk as the lack of sleep and water broke it. But in the end, she too survived the trial. She too crawled to the old woman to make her wish. "I don't want to die," she said through chapped lips. "But I wish I was never born. Could you do that for me?" The old woman looked up at her curiously. "Perhaps. Why is this your wish?" "Because I have never been happy. Not one day in my life," my daughter said, blinking away tears. "I had a mother who screamed at me for the slightest misstep. She demanded perfection, and I tried to give it to her. I gave her everything she wanted. I went to Yale, then Harvard Med School. There's no better doctor in the city, but every day I come home and wish I'd die in my sleep. I haven't spoken to my mom in years, but I still hear her screaming. The second I start to feel happy, she's right there in my ear, telling me I don't deserve an ounce of joy in my life." The old woman nodded. "I can give you what you wish," she said. "Wait," said my daughter. "If you grant the wish, what happens?" The old woman gestured to the work in her lap. "It would be a bit of bother," she said. "I'd have to unravel this a bit." She gestured to the yarn in her lap, still attached to the rug. 38 years worth of work, back to the time of your conception. I'd nudge things just a little bit. A different baby would fill her belly. "No," said my daughter, fighting back tears. No one else should have to do this. To live this." She thought for a moment, then said, "I want to wish for my mother to be barren, incapable of having a child, ever." The old woman smiled a bit sadly and nodded. She began to pull at the thread in her lap, unraveling the rug. "Anything else?" "Yes," said my daughter. "One day I want her to find out why." The old woman looked over at me now, then over at my daughter's specter. She shot me one last cruel smile, a look of satisfaction. Then she turned and walked through the darkness of the wall. She would not return. "Do you understand?" asked the old woman. "I can't allow your wish to undo hers." "I understand. Is there anything else I can offer you?" she asked. I shook my head. She looked up from her knitting one last time. "You may yet think of something," she said. "Come back any time. You know where to find me." Eve must have entered the room shortly after. She gave me a glass of water, which I drank desperately, and a fresh robe. She took me to a shower where I sat and cried on the wet floor. My skin was so broken that I could barely handle the lukewarm temperature. My knee throbbed but had regained a bit of its function. I saw that I would be whole again, physically at least. Since that day I've been at home, slowly repairing myself. Long baths, lunches of chicken broth, and juice cut with water. But I can't bring myself to call work, or anyone, really. I feel that the motor has been ripped out of me, that there's nothing to make me go anymore. What is a life without a purpose? I am not someone accustomed to drifting. And of course I've been angry, at my daughter and at myself. But there's nowhere for those feelings to go, nothing to do with them. I can't undo the mother. I was in some other fabric of reality. I am stuck, but at the same time, I have no desire to die. And lately, my thoughts have turned to my own mother, who I suppose made me this way. As I said before, so much of who I am came as a reaction to who she was. I think of the way she cackled when she was high. It was a selfish laugh, a laugh you couldn't share. Late at night, I find myself waking impossibly thirsty, but I do not drink. Instead, I kneel on the bed and stare into the darkness, and I think I see the old woman sitting there. I imagine crawling to her and whispering that I too wish my mother had been barren, that I too want her to know why. I imagine the old woman unraveling another few decades from her work to go back and fix things. And in my reverie, I sometimes hope that I won't be the last one to make this wish, that my mother will do the same, wishing her mother barren. And then on, until each bad mother through the centuries is erased along with history itself, the whole rug disappearing as the old woman pulls the thread, until all traces of humanity are wiped away, leaving nothing but a pile of tangled yarn. A deer broke into my house. It will never leave. Some nights I like to lie in bed awake, paralyzed with the fear that my wife will leave me. This particular night was one of those times. I was covered in cold sweat and lay on the mattress clutching the sheets while my beautiful wife Angela breathed slowly, rhythmically, next to me. It was insufferable. In the beginning it was a kaleidoscope of passion that lasted until just after the wedding. Now every small action she took felt like it was to spite me. Every movement of her deep blue eyes was done to look at another man. I still loved her dearly, but I no longer felt that it was reciprocated. Now it felt more like the love you have for a favorite TV show or a stuffed animal. I calmed myself and tried to get back to sleep. It was near enough a full moon, and the bright beams that came through the bedroom window made me feel like I was sleeping with a nightlight again. The curtains fluttered gently and I realized that I'd left the windows open. I lazily swung my legs out of bed and stood up. I was almost at the window when I realized something. I wanted it open. For as long as I could remember, I've suffered from chronic sinus pain. Sleeping with a little fresh air helped alleviate the problems caused by a stuffy room. Angela, however, hated the chill that came with it, and so the windows stayed shut. But Angela was asleep, and to hell with the reprimanding I get from her in the morning. Triumphantly, I turned back around and got into bed again. I wrapped myself in more of the sheet than I usually get and rolled over to get a good night's sleep. Less than 5 minutes later, I was back up again, closing the bedroom window. There really was no need for me to cast aside my wife's preferences. I'm sure she'd do the same for me. Back to bed, and I'm just lying there, staring at a crack in the ceiling. It's deep, noticeable, and twisted into the same shape as my grandmother's varicose veins. I try to think of how I could fix such a thing. I settled on filling it in with plaster. I rolled over and took my phone from my bedside. I opened notes and left a message for myself to go to the hardware store. I tried never to look at my phone after I went to bed, certainly after Angela came to bed, but in this case I like to think that I have enough self-control. Half an hour later I put my phone away, having spent the time silently crawling through my TikTok feed, which had been flooded with Malaysian cooking videos. I tried to lay as still as I could and clasp my eyes shut. My endeavor to sleep was cut short by a commotion from downstairs. Alert, I sat bolt upright. Could it be an intruder? A burglar? I rested a hand on Angela's shoulders and tried to shake her awake. She let out a low, guttural grunt and rolled over. I wasn't even sure if I had heard something and didn't want to disturb her over a false alarm. So, I stood up, crept to the baseball bat I had propped up against my dresser, and slowly opened the bedroom door. Standing at the top of the hall, I could hear some movement downstairs. Warily, I moved past the landing to the stairs and began to descend them. All I could think of at that moment was how the real estate agent who told us about the area's near-zero crime rate was lying. I grasped the wooden handle of the bat so hard my knuckles went white. I held it out in front of me as I reached the first floor. The commotion was coming from the kitchen, which I now neared. I held my breath and leapt around the corner. Holding the bat above my head, primed to swing, I confronted the person who broke into our home. Standing in the center of my kitchen was a deer. It wasn't startled by my dramatic entry, and I lowered the bat. For a second, we both stood there, staring at each other. The thing's antlers came up to my shoulders. It had a brown, shaggy coat and inquisitive eyes. I've never been hunting, and this was the first time I saw an animal like this up close. Usually they'd be rotting on the side of a road, but this creature was breathing heavily, letting out gasps of steam and warm saliva as it did. I noticed that the glass sliding doors were wide open, and I cursed myself for, presumably forgetting to close them before I went to bed. Angela and I had been sitting on the deck drinking for most of the evening after all. I tried to shoo the beast back through the entrance, and when that didn't work, tried to gently take a hold of its antlers and guide it out. As soon as I touched them, it bucked its head wildly and took a step forward. I recoiled in shock, then quietly laughed at myself for being so intimidated by Bambi. I shouted at it, but it didn't move an inch. I thought deer were supposed to be skittish around humans. When my problem didn't immediately fix itself, I obviously turned to the internet. I sat back on an ugly chair. My wife inherited that we keep out in the hall for some reason, and took out my phone as the deer trotted laps of my kitchen island. I searched online for what to do if a deer gets trapped in your house. No clear results came up, and no deleted Reddit user from 12 years ago made a post about having the same extremely niche problem as is usually the case. Both my wife and I have lived in the city all our lives until recently. Maybe this was just what we had to contend with. Now we live out in the exurbs. With no idea what to do next, I decided to go wake up my wife. I cursed our house's open plan, as there was no door between the kitchen and the connecting hallway that I could close. I just hoped the deer would stay where it was. Just before I ascended the stairs, I saw it was beginning to make its way further into the house. I let out a long sigh that didn't end until I reached my bedroom. Like a trooper, Angela was still asleep, snoring softly. I walked to her side and crouched down. I put a hand on her shoulder and gently shook her awake. She bolted upright when she finally did, her fight or flight kicking in. Angie, it's just me. It's just me, I said, trying to help her grasp what was going on. She sat upright and wiped her tired eyes with her palm. "Why did you wake me up?" she barked, frustrated. "We have a guest," I joked, downstairs. "A deer broke in somehow. I think I left the patio doors open." "A deer?" she whispered, still half asleep. "Yeah, I tried to get it out, but it wouldn't play ball," I replied. "And why did you wake me up?" asked Angela. "You know I have to get up at 6. I know, it's just that I need help," I said, suddenly feeling embarrassed. Angela got out of bed, muttering about how I couldn't do anything on my own. She threw on a cardigan and followed me downstairs. I was giving her a more in-depth rundown of what had happened when we reached the ground floor and saw something that stopped us in our tracks. Laying on the hardwood floor was the deer, dead from the looks of it. I took a step closer and saw that its eyes were glassy and its tongue hung lame from its jaws. My wife clasped her hands around her mouth and expressed her disgust with a groan. I crouched by the dead deer and noticed something strange about its body. It seemed deflated, hollow. I reached out and touched its stomach against my wife's protest, and to my surprise, the deer's side began to sink inwards until it was concave. It felt boneless. I took a frightened step back, and it was at that point that I noticed the long, perfectly straight cut that ran the length of the beast's belly. Blood and organs should have been spewing out, but there was no such thing. It was sterile. I stood up and turned to my wife. Before I could say anything, I saw that she was pointing. I looked, following her index finger, and my gaze found the basement door. It was now wide open. The only things we have in the basement are boxes for storage, and we hardly ever go down there. Guided by Angela, I approached the open door. I took one step into the darkness and felt around for the light switch. I flipped it on, but nothing happened. I flipped it again and again, but still nothing. Before I could ask, my wife went and got a flashlight from the kitchen. She came back, handed it to me, and urged me further into the basement. I descended the rotting wooden steps. The walls were bare, made from raw concrete with exposed pipes running along them. I reached the bottom floor and found the piles of boxes we'd left down here when we moved in. Bits of old furniture and unloved family heirlooms were scattered among them. I gave it a once-over, but nothing seemed to be down here. Definitely not any member of the deer's extended family. I turned around and walked to the foot of the staircase. That's when I heard it. It was a low creaking noise that froze me where I stood. I slowly turned back around and shone my flashlight at the source. The door to the old mahogany closet that had been left to gather dust by the house's previous owners had opened, just a crack. I made my way towards it, my light illuminating the wooden behemoth. I stood just in front of it and grabbed the knob. With a shaking hand, I swung the doors wide open. I walked out of the basement and saw my wife leaning against a wall, looking at her phone and rubbing her eyes. She looked up and smiled weakly when I emerged. "Find anything?" she asked. I wordlessly handed the flashlight to her. "I think you should go down there and see for yourself," I told her without any emotion. She sighed, but took it and traced my path back down the old steps. As soon as she was in, I silently closed the basement door. I took the key that rested on the door frame and locked it behind her. I rested against the now locked door and slid down it to the ground. I sat and whispered reassurances to myself that I was doing the right thing. I heard a clatter, then Angela started screaming. I covered my ears as she did. The noise was too much for me to bear. Then the screeching that sounded like it was ripping through her throat stopped. I stayed where I was for another hour. Eventually, I stood and made my way to the bedroom. I lay in bed awake, paralyzed with fear. I closed my eyes when I heard footsteps on the staircase. I tried not to react when my wife climbed into bed beside me. When I did fall asleep, close to sunrise, I dreamt of what I saw in the closet. It looked like a skinned body, with its emaciated arms and legs stretched to the proportions of a sloppy children's drawing. Its head vaguely resembled deer, with the fur pulled back to reveal tight sinew covering bone. The thing's eyes were bulging and milk white. With its size, I had no idea how it could fit into that small deer's skin, or my wife's. That was a few weeks ago now. Since that night, I feel like my life has improved dramatically. Angela hasn't argued with or belittled me in weeks. In fact, I haven't heard her speak in over a month. Sometimes she leaves for hours, even days at a time. I rest easy though, now knowing for certain that she isn't seeing someone behind my back. At night, we lay motionless in bed together. I like to trace the seam running down her abdomen with my fingers when we do. I played a prank. My family paid the price. I didn't want to write this. The words don't come easily to me. But on the advice of my therapist, I'm willing to try. She thinks it will help. And at this stage, what do I have to lose? She told me to just be honest and not worry about what anyone thinks of the quality. With that in mind, maybe this will be written and stuffed into a dusty drawer or a folder marked for my eyes only. Actually, for nobody's eyes only, ever. I don't know. I'll give it a go. So here goes. Here's what I remember. My name is Chris and I'm 44 years old. At about 3 p.m. on August 14th, 2016, myself, my younger brother David, and my two sons, Lucas and Billy, aged 11 and 10 at the time, entered the line for the Stampede roller coaster at Golden Spur Adventure Park near Charlotte, North Carolina. Any theme park fans can skip the following description, but for those who aren't part of the White Knuckle Brigade, and I count myself amongst their flock, Stampede opened on May 3rd, 1993, and was a hypercoaster MEAV. That's a roller coaster with a height or drop of 200 feet or more. Track length or top speed can vary 5,057 feet and 72 miles per hour for Stampede if you want to know, as long as the all-important height of 200 feet is met. Stampede wasn't the world's first hypercoaster. That belonged to Magnum XL 200 in Cedar Point, and I promise that's the end of the coaster trivia. But it had one crowning distinction. It was the first hypercoaster to be near enough on my doorstep. I watched it being built. My school bus passed Golden Spur every day, a cruel joke, if there ever was one, to be ushered past a place of utter joy and delivered to a place of utter despair. Every day my friends and I would gawk out of the windows, hoping to see more of the gleaming purple track reach up into the sky. There was always a slight disappointment on the rides back from school if we couldn't see any progress, though we'd always disagree. "It's definitely got higher," I said. "What? It's just the same." "They need to hurry the fuck up," Brian said. He was my best friend at the time. But as May 1993 neared, the construction seemed to go into overdrive, almost as if the construction workers were hurrying to satisfy us. Everyone showed their appreciation by gawking through the glass even more. Everyone except for Philip. Philip was in our group, but very much on the periphery. Literally. Whenever we hung out, he'd always stand slightly apart from us, as if worried that if he stood any closer, we'd notice him, realize we didn't need him, and then cast him out. He was an awkward kid. Bad clothes, bad face, and physique. He didn't smell, but we didn't shut down the rumors to the contrary. I went to his house once, forced to by Mom, who pitied him and had promised his mother I'd visit, and I remember smirking when I found out he still had an ordinary Nintendo well into the era of the Super Nintendo. I told the rest of the gang and we laughed. No doubt when Philip was standing just a few feet away, he probably forced a laugh himself to fit in. Yes, he was very much on the periphery, and we did everything we could to keep him there. My friends knew why Philip would only sneak quick glances at the roller coaster. "Does it scare you, Philly?" Peter T would ask, adding a stretching whining sound to turn Philly into Philly. Whether he was scared or not was irrelevant, though I suspected he was. He was the weakest of the group, so he was the easy target. Whenever we passed the giant steel snake looming on the horizon, we'd return to our favorite subject. "You won't go on it. You're too much of a pussy," Charlie B shouted. "I will. I'm not scared," Philip would shout back, and we'd all laugh. We didn't have to wait long to test whether Philip was a pussy. On May 1st, 1993, as part of a big press event to celebrate the roller coaster's launch, Golden Spur invited local schools, including ours, to come and ride Stampede. It was going to be the best day ever, and Brian cooked up an idea to make it even better. Just after 3 p.m. on August 14, 2016, my younger son Billy whined. 80 minutes? Do we really have to wait 80 minutes, Dad? He had just spotted the digital sign that showed the line waiting time, and now his enthusiasm for riding Stampede, an enthusiasm that woke me up by diving onto my bed at 6:30 a.m., had waned. Don't worry, it will be more like 40, and it will move fast. I knew Golden Spur operations were solid. Operations referring to the efficiency of the staff at loading and unloading passengers, a crucial factor that affects waiting time. Again, I'm a theme park fan, plus they were running 2 trains on the track. No way it would be 80 minutes, but my confidence didn't convince my son, who gave me an unsure look. I promise, I added. Okay, he said, looking at the ground. Yeah, it will definitely be 40, Lucas said. I smiled. My oldest had a habit of taking my side in almost everything. I felt vindicated when we turned the corner and arrived in the first section of the snaking line to find it was empty. See, what did I tell you? 30 minutes tops. But before Billy could acknowledge he should have more faith in his dad, he and his brother ran off, rapidly ducking their heads underneath the wooden beams that formed the line barrier. I remember doing that at their age, David said. My back would scream at me if I tried now. Mine too. My brother and I took the more dignified approach and threaded along the entire path, left and right, left and right. Billy and Lucas giggled at us. We must have looked ridiculous to them, walking up and down the empty line, obeying the rules like stiff robots, when no one was around to tell us otherwise. Wait till you're our age, boys, I thought. After we caught up with the boys and they led us through a few more empty lanes, we finally arrived at the back of the line, or more precisely at the back of a group of sweaty teenagers whose shirts stuck to their skin. From here, the line led to a staircase which climbed to the second floor, aka the boarding area, where people would huddle around their desired riding row. The fearless would gather at the front row, but fellow roller coaster fans would always gather where the best G-forces were to be found, right at the back. As the ride boarding and dispatch area was above us, we'd hear the clamber of feet rushing onto the ride through the roof, followed by the hydraulic hiss of closing shoulder restraints, and then excited whoops and exaggerated screams as the coaster's brakes were released and the train rolled out of the station. Then the people on the first floor would catch sight of the riders, some thrilled, some terrified, as the train dipped down, turned a corner, and began its long climb up the first drop. This process repeated itself every 90 to 120 seconds, provided the Golden Spur staff were on form, and on that day it looked like they were. Definitely 30 minutes, I thought. How long does it take to climb to the top, Dad? Lucas asked. He tried to sound as nonchalant as possible, but I could tell his nerves were starting to fizz. Indeed, I knew days before, when he asked me ever so casual questions. How long does it last? How high is it? That he wasn't keen on the coaster, unlike his daredevil younger brother, but there was no way he was going to gift him the everlasting bragging rights of being the sole rider while he watched from the sidelines. How long? 20 seconds if that, I said. It was more like 35, but for some reason that number sounded too high, and I didn't want to give his nerves the fuel they needed to bail. Sometimes a kid needs to hear a little lie to push themselves. He nodded, buying my fib, and went back to talking to his brother. David gave me a wry look. You know hell counted as we go up, he said quietly. By then it will be too late. Am I a terrible father? The worst. He smiled and folded his arms over his big chest. Shall we do this one? Then the log flume, then get something to eat. Sounds good. David and I then chatted about how the nights were sucking that season, a conversation subject we'd deployed numerous times before. My brother and I loved each other, but we weren't close, and in those kinds of relationships you need pull-in and emergency topics. The night's woes were a reliable go-to of ours. After a couple of minutes we'd exhausted the subject and settled into an agreed well-earned moment of unembarrassed silence. I wished he'd kept it going, but when I saw him stare at the teenage boys ahead of us, I knew what he was going to say before he even said it. Hey, do you remember? Don't, I said, shooting him a cold, shut the fuck up stare that came out of nowhere. He shut the fuck up and nodded, instantly catching my meaning. Not in front of my sons, David. I know what you were talking about, but not in front of them. Our silence became awkward and we'd used up all our baseball ammo. The truth was, I had been thinking about it too since I'd spotted the teenage boys. They were a gangly bunch, much like my friends. I hadn't thought about it at all much over the years. Things that feel like they're going to be forever burned into your brain fade away with time and its companion, maturity. Would I have thought about it if the teenage boys weren't there? To my shame, probably not. But I think it was around then. In that silence with David and I can be 100% sure, because this is where my memory becomes hazy, that I felt what I can only describe as a profound sense of disquiet. That word might seem too slight, but that's what it was. Not agitation, certainly not dread, disquiet, and I found its presence in the place of utter joy disturbing enough. I put it down to seeing the teenagers and remembering what David was clumsily referring to, but even then I knew it couldn't be explained by mere guilt for past actions. I felt the guilt in my stomach, but the disquiet, that wasn't inside me, that was outside, in the air, lurking around. Then again, I might be remembering this all wrong. I might have been laughing and joking the whole time in that line and felt zero disquiet whatsoever. It was over 8 years ago. Maybe I've made it up. At least that's the lesson my therapist tries to teach me, that I've missed, and am paraphrasing her, created a fiction where I was mystically forewarned over what happened to compound my feelings that I could have avoided it. Maybe she's right, but I don't think so. Another train left the station, and the line moved forward. I never believed Brian created his idea. I figured he stole it from some other kid in some other school who probably stole it from another kid in some other school. But when he pitched it to us in the lunchtime cafeteria, checking beforehand that Philip wasn't around, we didn't care about who the legitimate author was. We only cared that it sounded like the coolest, funniest prank ever. This was his idea. Stampede had a purple-colored track. That meant it had purple-colored nuts and bolts. So what if we got hold of some nuts and bolts, painted them purple, then one of us sits next to Philip on the ride, and as we're climbing up, we sneak the nuts and bolts out from our pocket, show them to Philip, and tell him that we just found them underneath his seat. Imagine the look on his face when he thinks his seat isn't bolted on right. Hell shit his pants. It was genius, and more importantly, it didn't require a lot of effort from a bunch of lazy 13-year-olds. Peter volunteered to source the nuts and bolts from his dad's tool shed, and Charlie said he could supply the paint and the labor. That made sense, as he was the best amongst us at art, though slapping on some cheap purple gloss wasn't exactly going to stretch his burgeoning talent. That left someone to fill the role of one of us, i.e. the person who would sit next to Philip and be the prank's front man. There wasn't much discussion on that job. I was viewed as the funniest of our group, and the most theatrical, though that boiled down to being in the school play. I didn't object to carrying out the prank. In fact, I jumped on the offer, knowing that it would go down as one of the all-time best and I'd be at the center of the glory. Yes, despite my therapist's protestations, I was a real asshole as a kid. No, it's not true that all kids are. Some are on the side of decent. I was firmly lodged on the other side. A few days before our school's visit to Golden Spur, Peter and Charlie completed their tasks, and I took delivery of 3 shiny purple nuts and 3 shiny purple bolts. I then had to carry out the next phase of the plan, making sure Philip rode Stampede with us. That meant being both extra friendly to him and allaying any concerns he had about riding. I thought the best approach was to be direct. "Dude, you're gonna go on Stampede with us, right?" I asked him in Wednesday morning science class. We never called him dude, and I could see a vague sense of suspicion come over his face, but it was pushed out by a stronger desire to finally be included. Yeah. I'm not scared of it," he said, convincing nobody. "I know you're not, dude." I instantly knew that was one too many dudes, but before his suspicion returned and he smelled a rat, I made him the offer he couldn't refuse. "Would you sit next to me?" Boom. Whatever concern he had vanished in a big grin. "Yeah, sure," he said, pulling his grin back a touch so he didn't look too keen. A WW butt. He thinks he's part of the gang, I thought. "Where do you want to sit?" I asked. I don't mind. I don't want to sit at the front. I just shit my pants." That was a clever touch. Show him you're the pussy. Get him on side. Win his trust. Yes, I was a real asshole back then. "We could sit in the middle?" he said. "Yeah, good idea, Phil. A perfect location, center stage, where there'll be no hiding from our laughter as we all disembark and see your shit-scared face." For the next few days, I was Phil's best buddy. I made sure he was never alienated, and my friends were able to push their acting abilities, smiling, laughing, and playing pals with him the whole time. Then May 3rd, prank day, arrived. Our year climbed on board 3 coaches, and I sat with my bestest friend Philip on the 25-minute drive to Golden Spur, laughing with him all the way. 3 shiny purple nuts and 3 shiny purple bolts stuffed into my right pocket. "Billy, get down from there." He had been copying one of the teenage boys who'd been sitting on top of one of the wooden barriers. Billy jumped down. The teenager stayed sitting, then slumped down 10 seconds later, an amount of time which told me he had decided to come down on his own volition, and not because he heeded the words of a stern man. I smiled to myself. I would have done the same. We were now on the boarding floor. There was a marked increase in people's joy from the first to the second floor. Walking up the stairs felt like entering a higher atmosphere of excitement. The train was in sight. People were edging forward, filling in the spaces between each other more quickly than downstairs. Ride time was almost here. "Are you okay, boys? Excited?" "Yeah," Billy said. "Yeah, Dad," Lucas said. He didn't look as nervous now. Excited adrenaline was winning the battle over freaking out adrenaline. My lie was worth it. Billy started pulling himself up on the barrier, performing his own versions of tricep dips. Then he'd jump down, take a step forward when space appeared, and pull himself up again. I let him do that. His energy had to go somewhere. "Where do you boys want to sit?" David asked. "Front row." "Great." Just when Lucas' nerves had settled. "Thanks, bro," I thought. We could do," Lucas said, but I could see his mind screaming, "Fuck that." "Just sit in the front," Billy said, providing his brother with no help. I offered a get out. "There's lots of people waiting for the front. We'll be here at least another 15 minutes. Let's just sit in the middle." David got my point and backed me up. "Yeah, let's just do the middle." Lucas failed to hide his relief. We walked forward, just 2 snake lines from the boarding area. I gazed up at the metal roof and grimaced. The faded purple beams were speckled with chunks of dirty, discolored gum. Golden Spur operations obviously hadn't pushed themselves to attain a 100% cleanliness record. I wondered how the hell did the gum get up there, and how many years has it built up? Maybe kids in my year had been the first to christen the beams. I certainly didn't. I wouldn't dream of being that bad. It's amazing to think that my oh-so-precious moral code would draw the line at hurling gum, but was fine with the prank. Philip. My mind returned back to him. I wonder what he's doing now. Then I thought, duh, you know you can check. I took out my phone, brought up Facebook, typed his name into the search bar, and narrowed the search filters to Charlotte. Of course there were quite a few Philips, but I knew what my one looked like, adjusting for aging. I scrolled down and spotted a black and white, somewhat pretentious photo of a mid-40s man with a thin face, glasses and hair that was fading fast. I dialed back this man's face, 20 years in my head, and it more or less matched the Philip I knew. That's got to be him. I clicked his profile. And that disquiet I felt earlier turned all the way up to dread. I was grateful the right pocket on my shorts had a zipper. If it hadn't, the purple nuts and bolts would have fallen out, especially as we ran, near enough sprinted, all the way from the park's entrance to Stampede. I made sure Philip was right beside me, slowing down or encouraging him to keep up if I thought he was falling behind. When we got to the ride, puffed out and already sweating through our shirts, we were thrilled to find the place surrounded by TV news cameras. My mom would tell me later that morning news reporter Gloria Hanford had ridden Stampede, and a camera positioned right in front of her face showed her shrieking the whole way. We waved at the cameras as we ran through the entrance, not knowing if they were filming, but promising ourselves we'd watch the news for the first time ever, no doubt, to see if we were going to be famous. We almost threw ourselves under the wooden barriers, tackling each one like inverted hurdles. Then it was straight up the stairs and onto the second floor, where eager Golden Spur staff, or at least the ones who could do their best impression of being eager, greeted us. A few more hurdles to duck under, and then we were at the track. I quickly counted the rows. There were 14 of them, and I led Philip straight to number 7, slap bang in the middle. My friends were either side, the really cool kids of our year amassed at the front, and the rest slotted into whatever rows were left. Another news camera on the opposite platform filmed us boarding. We waved, and the cameraman waved back with a lot less enthusiasm. Then an empty train rolled into the station, and our whooping and hollering blasted out. "Shit, shit, shit," Brian said, his face bursting with excitement. We each swapped final knowing looks, and I performed the ostentatious move of patting my pocket. Philip didn't notice. He was watching the train come to a stop. The nerves had denied sparking inside him. "Don't worry, dude," I said. He gave me a weak smile. The shoulder restraints jolted up. The gates opened and we barged on board. Then we pulled down the restraints, hearing that gear-crunching sound only roller coasters make. "You good, pal?" I asked, deliberately swapping out a dude. "Yeah, all good." Two attendants scampered down both platforms, thrusting the restraints deeper into our bodies if they suspected there was the tiniest chance of us being able to breathe. Luckily they didn't push down too hard on mine, luckily because I didn't want my circulation cut off, and luckily because if I was restrained anymore I wouldn't have been able to reach into my pocket and take out my props. What a catastrophe that would have been. A staff member's voice came over the PA system. "Welcome James Oakland High." There was a cheer across the station. "You are about to ride Golden Spur's newest attraction, Stampede, reaching speeds of 72 miles per hour and a height of 206 feet. Prepare yourself to face the brutal power of the mighty beast of the Great Plains." He wasn't the greatest actor, but we weren't the most discerning critics and we just lapped it all up. "Keep your arms and legs inside the..." Our attention flatlined the moment he read the mandatory safety briefing. Then 10 seconds later the hydraulics hissed, the train rolled out and we exploded into cheers. As we turned the first corner, I unzipped my pocket and took a firm grip of the contents inside. They dug into my palm, not going anywhere. We then inclined 45 degrees back and began the climb, the morning sun warming our faces. "I'm so sorry, Philip. Wish I could have been there for you. I'm in utter shock. Reach out to me if anyone wants to talk." You didn't need to be a detective to realize that the comments on Philip's Facebook pointed to him committing suicide. The funeral had taken place at St. Christopher's Church, January 14, 2014, just over 2 years ago. The invitation, written by his parents, was posted on his wall and showed an enlarged version of the same black and white photo from his profile. That explained what I had dismissed as pretentiousness. This was the artistic, dignified photo people use of their loved ones for their funerals. I felt a sudden rush of guilt, coupled with a need to dive in and learn everything I could about Philip in an attempt to fill in the last 20-something years. I tapped on his photos. There weren't many. A shot of him in an office somewhere doing some office job. Him and a couple of friends out at a bar. No wife, girlfriend or boyfriend for that matter. I then looked at the comments and noticed there weren't many of those either. The guilt inside of me stirred. It didn't seem that Philip had lived much of a life. I turned to David. That thing, what you were going to say before." "Yeah, sorry about that," he said. "No, it's fine." Did you know about Philip?" His head tilted back and let out a deep sigh. "Yeah, I did. Horrible, wasn't it?" "I just found out," I said, keeping my voice low. "Fucking Facebook." "Shit, really?" "Yeah, it was bad." He then saw what I was thinking. "Hey, don't be thinking. You know?" "I'm not," I said. But I was thinking just that. At least the irrational, paranoid side of me was saying you might not have caused it, but you didn't exactly help. Chris, you served him an appetizer of shit in the 12-course taster menu of shit that was his life. But then the rational side, the one that says you're not the center of the universe, and that people move on, forget things, shake off the past, a side whose voice funnily enough sounds very much like my therapist. That side said what you did had nothing to do with what transpired. Some 20 years later, frankly, Chris, get a grip. We were almost at the boarding rows. "Dad, you were right. 30 minutes on the dot," Lucas said, showing me his phone's clock. "Oh yeah, I was." "Are you okay?" My perceptive son could always tell when I wasn't. "Yeah, fine. Just thinking about what we should go on next." The log flume Billy squealed, his mind now racing towards the next source of fun. "Sounds good," I said. A train pulled out of the station, cheers and pretend screams following behind it. We filled in the space in the middle boarding rows. David and I were in row 8, Lucas and Billy were in row 7. Row 7, it lit up in my mind, and suddenly the dread swam around me. I could feel it everywhere, distinct and undeniable. I felt the sudden urge to grip the wooden barrier tight, worried that if I didn't, I might faint. David saw my face. I imagined it had turned gray. "Bro, you okay?" I nodded, trying to compose myself. "Yeah, just a bit of a shock." But the dread was suffocating. My irrational side was banging pans together in my mind. Another train came in, stopped, and its shell-shocked passengers disembarked. We boarded. "Phil, holy shit, Phil!" I should have been the lead in the school play. My performance was perfect. "Are these from your seat?" My hand revealed my props. I just found them on the floor. When spitballing the prank, we were pretty sure Philip would be scared. We didn't think, however, he would experience abject terror. If we had, would we have gone through with it? Probably, yes. I remember his eyes flicking rapidly from the nuts and bolts in my hand to my mock concerned face. Then he jolted his head forward to try and look underneath his seat, but the shoulder restraints kept him in place. Then the color rushed out of his face. "Stop the ride." He almost whispered the words, as if he were too embarrassed to say them out loud. In my head I thought, "Say them louder, Phil. Let's hear you scream them. Please, stop the ride." He managed to push some volume out of his narrowing throat, but not enough to beat the loud click 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 of the roller coaster's chain, and certainly not enough to satisfy us. Then came a real proper cry. "Please, help, help me." That was more like it. We started giggling. Philip looked at me, his eyes turning white. I could tell he was thinking, "He's not helping me. He's not helping me." And that's when the real horror set in. He started thrashing wildly against his restraints, his body convulsing with pure blind panic. "Let me out! Please! Let me out! Help!" And then whatever residual embarrassment he had left in him disappeared, because that's when he screamed. It was an unashamed, desperate scream that no one could argue was funny. Our giggles, which we had kept to a respectable volume, suddenly turned way down. We didn't think it would be like this. This wasn't the cartoony depiction of fright we had imagined. This was horrific. He screamed and screamed, like a man being dragged to his death, which I suppose he thought he was. The scream was ear-piercing. I suddenly felt the need to bring the show to an abrupt end, if not to save my hearing. "Philip, it's just..." But that's when we reached the top, our inclined bodies shifting from 45 degrees to 90 and back to 45, and we went over. Our collective screams were no match for Philip's. He felt death teasing and prodding him through every twist and turn, every corkscrew and every helix. There was no excitable adrenal rush for him, just sheer awful horror. The ride lasted 176 seconds for us. I've no idea how long it lasted for him. As the train slowed, I could hear him whimpering and saw tears on his red cheeks. "Phil, it was just a joke. You were okay." He didn't respond. I didn't know if he could hear me or if he was just ignoring me. Brian and Charlie, having not sat where I was and not been up-close spectators to the horrific meltdown, began to resume their giggling. I tried to twist my head and give them a look, but the restraints stopped me from turning. The train pulled into the station. The restraints released. I got out and turned back to Philip. "I swear, it was just..." And that's when I realized why he hadn't said anything to me. His light red shorts had turned dark red, a stain moving from the crotch all the way to the hem. Brian was the first to laugh. Charlie followed a second later. Then everyone crowded around, wanting to see what was so funny. Philip tried to cover the stain with his hands, but it was too big. With whatever dignity he had left, he forced himself out of the train, and that's when the laughter exploded into manic hysterics. His front stain had a twin, just a little one, but enough. Everyone pointed and howled. He looked at me. To this day, I've never known a look of such painful betrayal. Then he fled. Out of the ride, out of the park. I think he phoned his mom, who picked him up. Brian and Charlie looked like they were going to pass out from laughing. I pretended to laugh. I knew it was wrong, but I still pretended anyway. Then as we walked out of the ride, we were treated to a final curtain call of unforgettable comedy, the ride photo booth. "Oh my God, look," Brian said. There on the screen was Philip, his agony captured for all of us to enjoy again. "Shall we buy it?" Charlie asked. I had to draw a line. We had our fun. Time to grow a fucking conscience. $3.99? No way. Let's just go do the log flume. And now here we are, the part I really don't want to write. But I will. I must. I wasn't cheering as we turned the first corner and started the climb. Everyone else was. My kids certainly were. I remember just being very still, almost as if I didn't want to spook anything. "You okay?" David asked, his face wrought with worry for me. "Yeah, I'm good." I shut any conversation down. I just wanted to do the climb, go over the top, give a few token yells of tepid joy, and get to the goddamn log flume. Stampede's chain, slick with oil and grease, dragged the train up the track. Click, 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 click. A voice in my head told me to relax, just enjoy the ride. We were about a quarter of the way up when I heard the first sound, a clanging noise of metal hitting metal. I couldn't tell where it had come from, but I knew it was close and I didn't like it. Then there was Lucas' voice. "Dad, what was that?" Through the gap in the headrest, I saw him look down at the bottom of his seat. I could only see half his face, his brown hair hanging over his cheek, but I could tell he'd gone completely white. "Dad, what's wrong?" I shouted. But somehow I already knew. Another metal clang. That was number 2. Something's falling on the floor. I don't want to write this. There was this unspeakable fear in his voice. I can hear it now. Daddy, help. The third clang. Then Lucas' chair began to rattle. We were almost at the top. I think I said it will be okay. A final stupid lie I told my son, and then we went over. You'll have to imagine the rest. I can't do it. Besides, you could always read the official report if you're so inclined. According to investigators, Seat 7A Metais, Lacus Seats, was ejected from the train due to insufficient component bonding. If the nuts and bolts fell off, 3 shiny purple nuts and 3 shiny purple bolts fell off. Make of that what you will. God knows I have. A year or two later, Stampede was demolished. In truth, I can't remember too much after the drop. They say one's brain shifts, making happy memories down the priority list when you're in a trauma situation. I do remember flashes though, coming into the station, an awful sound of wailing coming from people I didn't know, clawing at my restraint, screaming at David to stay with Billy, running out of the station in some dumb attempt to find Lucas and maybe make him whole. I might also struggle to remember because that day happened over 8 years ago now. My brother and I have drifted further apart, but my marriage has clung on. We avoided the death of a child equals divorce cliché, but when Billy leaves for college and the house is quieter, well, probably succumb to it. He's become a fine young man, by the way. There was a year or two of nightmares, some therapy, but it hasn't defined him. His life is full of new things, new friends, new distractions, things that can help but push the old into a corner. When I ask him if he thinks of Lucas, he says all the time, but I think he's lying to make me feel better. I'm not angry at him. I envy him. His brother is going one way in his life, receding into the past further and further, while he's moving into a bright big future. I think of him though, not every day, but most. And when I do, the thought is accompanied with the same pathetic question, did I cause it? Over the years I've reached 90% for no, that it was just a horrendous coincidence, not cosmic revenge. But 10% stubbornly remains, and it's connected to one memory from that day that refuses to fade away in time. A detail my therapist would love for me to rationalize and just let go. I'm running out of the station, past the ride photo booth. My eyes flick to the screens, and in the space where Lucas and his chair were meant to be, right beside my terrorized Billy, a face looks right at me. Philip's face. He smiles. I suspect he'll still remember that smile when I'm an old man and I don't remember much of anything else. Evidently, some things just can't be forgiven. That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.